Just Josh Linker. We're watching a couple of showers around the area right now. I do expect to see some more as we go through the day, but we're looking at Clystra 9. We've got a little cluster of showers in Polk County heading now into eastern Hillsborough County. Everything is moving along from east to west at a fairly good clip, and that means if you get under one of those showers, it's not going to last all that long. Temperatures outside in the mid-80s pretty much everywhere across the area, so if you're thinking about getting out to cast your vote today, early voting of course continues. We are looking at temperatures in the mid-80s with breezy conditions and a few of these scattered showers out there. So if your voting location
Thank you.
You're good, Pam?
I'm all good.
How are you, Mark?
I'm doing fine, thanks.
Good.
We're up on these.
Oh, that one's not up.
That one's not on.
Okay. Good afternoon. We will call the work session to order. We left off after 2 weeks ago when we finished items 1 through 7. We were going to start out with item 8, which is how do you want to interact with Scientology? Mark, we didn't know if you were going to make it. You know, it was looking slim. We were going to get that over with in about 2 minutes. But one of the questions is, can we cooperate? Or do we move forward alone? Or legally, do we need to be cautious about our speech? Pam can address that, but certainly this is always one of the elephants in the room when campaign season comes around and we talk about downtown. So I think it's legitimate that we have a real conversation about it. So who wants to start off?
Should Pam?
Yes,
like me to
Pam
start?
probably should start.
So, in your legislative capacity, you guys have immunity. So you can make whatever comments you would like to make. However, what I would like for you to recall is when you start taking action, those comments that you make may come back to haunt you. For example, you pass an ordinance which you say is neutral from a religious standpoint. Now, this is an actual scenario. This happened here with us back in the late 80s, early 90s, before I got here. And you pass an ordinance that limits, that case was solicitations. And we, in the preparation of that ordinance, we laid the predicate that it was neutral as to religion. However, there were many hours worth of testimony taken by counsel and public hearing and many statements by the council that addressed Scientology specifically. So when a court looked at that, they looked at the numerous hours of public comments which expressed hostility toward the church and actions of the church. And they struck our ordinance and said, this is not neutral. And they used our own language, our council's language, against us. So you can say what you want, but expect to see it again if we take an action which is perceived by some not to be neutral or based on religious animus. So that's just to kind of sum up what the situation is.
Okay. Thank you for that, counsel.
All right, I'll be
Go
happy
ahead,
to start.
Councilmember Bunker.
Well, can we cooperate or do we move forward alone? After the Urban Land Institute came to town and told us the most important thing is we have to partner with Scientology. Well, the first thing that Scientology did was stab us in the back and get in the way of the aquarium moving downtown, which you said in the last meeting was the single biggest thing that could have made a difference downtown. So Scientology's goals are different than ours. I would love to take them at their word when they say that they want a vibrant downtown, but I haven't seen any actions toward that. And much of what they have done is try to keep the district quiet and private for them, so it becomes essentially their campus. I think there's a way for us to interact when we need to. If there's a land swap, for instance, that it makes sense, I see no reason not to go ahead with that. But my own personal feeling is that, you know, they've been here since '75. If they've wanted to make this a prosperous downtown, they haven't taken any actions to do that. In fact, it seems that in 2017, when they failed to get the piece of property they wanted, it seems like a coordinated effort was put in place to purchase all the remaining property downtown with cash for sometimes 2, 3, or 4 times. But I think we do need to be careful.
Okay. Anything else?
Well, okay, well, let me say a couple things that will come back to haunt me. You know, when I'm talking about Scientology, I'm not talking about the religious beliefs or the Scientologists who are members of the organization. I'm personally talking about the organization itself, which was created as a mirror image of L. Ron Hubbard's paranoia and vindictiveness, and those policies that he put into effect are still in effect. And I do think that we have a duty to let people know of some of their practices, like their drug rehab program, which continues to exploit people in this area and across the country. I don't know how we can do that as a city, but I think it's important to know that they prey upon grieving parents who are suddenly forced with the option that, okay, you give us $20-some thousand or your son's going to die. And then they arrive there to find out that everything they were told about, you know, trained professional staff and what they were going to encounter wasn't actually the case. And they're out $20-some thousand because their child has been booted to the street. And this is a situation where the entire Narconon program, or I think now they were calling it Fresh Start or Fresh Step, because Narconon had been so, the name had been so ruined. But then this family that I recently talked to in the area here, all their paperwork came back to them from Narconon. And the entire drug rehab program are the opening steps in Scientology. So in one building, it's all religious practice, and another building, oh, it has nothing to do with religion, but it's the exact same processes.
Okay. Councilmember Hamilton?
The way it's written on the agenda, you know, how do you want to interact with Scientology? Can we cooperate or do we move forward alone? I think the answer to both questions is yes. Can we cooperate? Absolutely. Are we willing to cooperate? Absolutely. We have to, we have no option but to do our business in the public, out front. And I think when it's something that we require, or that requires, or we desire Scientology's cooperation with, we reach out. The problem is we don't always get a response. They have their own reasons for not responding, and they're the ones that have to give those reasons. I'm not going to sit here and speculate. But on projects that we don't need their approval, or they just flat say, no, we're not interested at this time, and we feel it's a valid project or something we want to do, I absolutely think we can go ahead alone and do it alone. So I recognize that parishioners of Scientology and the organization itself own a lot of properties. But if they're not going to be transparent and cooperative with us and open with us to communicate and tell us what their plans are in that, I'm not going to sit and twiddle my thumbs waiting for it. So, I mean, that's always been my approach with them. And, I think one of the other problems with Scientology is you never know who you're talking, you try and talk to some of the local people, and a lot of times you don't get an answer because the answer has to come from farther up the food chain. And we don't always get an answer from farther up the food chain. So, it's a frustrating thing. As Mark said, they've been here since the mid-'70s. I think they were actually here even earlier than '75. We didn't realize who they were until '75. It is a very frustrating thing. There's a lot of misunderstanding in our community about Scientology and whether or not they pay taxes, which they absolutely do. Only a very small portion of their overall holdings are tax exempt. However, owning a property and paying tax on it is one thing, but when it's an empty building and there's nothing going on and nothing that benefits the community, an empty building does not benefit our community. Even though it pays taxes, the empty building does not benefit our community. So, if they're really interested in our community, I challenge them to get things going in those empty buildings. So.
And let's not be limited to just these two questions. I think we ought to go beyond that. I mean, when I did my survey during the campaign, and I've told you we got about 3,200 responses back, this was where people spent the most time on the surveys. They checked off that they were happy with police, and happy with solid waste, and happy with Parks and Rec. And, some went to the beach, some didn't. Some thought the beach was too expensive to park, some didn't. But where the bulk of the time was spent on almost all of my questionnaires was in the section where I asked 4 questions about Scientology. And one of the things that I find interesting and is a challenge for us as a city council is that there are a lot of people that will say, I will not come downtown because of Scientology. But then when we try to do something downtown with some of our lands, they don't want to allow that either. So on one hand, I don't care about downtown anymore, won't go there, but don't utilize some of your resources to actually change the dynamic in downtown. And that's one of the things I struggle with. I go all the way back to 2000. Scientology was here. A lot of people had a similar feeling towards them at the time. Actually, probably a greater percentage is what I would guess. I don't know what the two of you would think from being here that long. And yet the 2000 referendum, some of it was structural, but it went down in flames. because people felt like that's some of our most valuable land. Now, this is something that could have changed the dynamic potentially, and yet unwilling to do so. And that's one of the things that I have to think about with the Harbor View site and the City Hall site when we come up on those, we have some people that will come to the Capitol Theater. We did a lot of surveying, and there are certain age groups that are more apt to come. The younger you are, the more apt you're to come to downtown. That's really how it came out. So the older acts tended to struggle a little bit more because that demographic of clientele was not as interested in coming to downtown. I think you see a lot of the younger people and they just don't care. They're going to go wherever they want if there's something good to do. And if there isn't, they're going to go wherever the excitement is. But I want to make sure we kind of talk about that too. And also, I think we ought to talk about if we had a relationship, what would your expectations be? So, I just wanted to add those in there. Let's give them the first bite of the apple now, and we can come back.
Go ahead.
I have one question, because Councilmember Hamilton brought it up. So I wanted just a general clarification or ideas. How often have we reached out, and why, and when have we been ignored? I mean, I don't have a historical perspective of that. Does anybody have an idea of? Because you said often we reach out, or sometimes we reach out and we've kind of been ignored to engage
I don't know
with.
that we have a running scoreboard, but, and I think the city manager and the city attorney probably have a better.
I mean, Pam can correct me, but I think we had conversation prior to the CMA property sale. And then when that occurred, things kind of went dark for a while. And then it started up again
About a year ago.
Yeah, about a year ago. And
So do we do the initiating most generally? I mean, do we do the first reaching out? So I'm just trying to understand
Yes.
how frequently we've tried to engage to get things going and to find out what their desires are and goals are, with downtown, and how frequently have we done it? Like, when was the last time? And how frequently are we ignored? I mean, are we just keep knocking on the door and they're not? So I don't have a sense of that.
I don't think that we have ever knocked on the door and gotten no response. If Bill reaches out, or if I have reached out, and we would be the ones most likely to do that, I cannot say that we have ever been ignored.
Okay.
We have, now Bill, you correct me if I'm wrong, we have made very few demands of each other, particularly since the aquarium property issue.
right.
We haven't really asked each other for anything. We had a land swap a number of years ago, not that many, 4 or 5. And that worked out the way we ultimately wanted it to. It was not hitchless, but the hitches were, I think, more on our side than on the church's side. Historically, when we have made asks of them, they have done what we've asked. As an example, the uniforms. We commented years ago that the sea of blue was a little overwhelming. We didn't ask them to change their uniforms, but based on that outreach, and I was not a part of that. I think Mike Roberto may have been a part of that.
That was the first time.
And they agreed to do it. They changed the uniforms, and they've gone to the pastels and other colors that they've done now.
So Pam, you're right, the sea of blue went away,
Yes,
and then that ultimately was replaced by a sea of beige, brown, or whatever, And then the mayor asked for, directly to Mr. Miscavige if he would consider doing, eliminating that, and he said no, that he couldn't do that. Mayor, you can, since
And-
you're the one
Well,
that
that it
asked
was
the
a
question.
part of the culture for the people that were visiting from outside of Clearwater to be able to see those people in uniform and be able to identify them and ask them where they needed to go for different services and everything else. To which I asked if we could get a pin that would indicate for people that they were somebody that they could ask for information. And that just never came to fruition.
My understanding, and I have not independently researched that, but a part of it had to do with their not-for-profit status and uniforms. And if they were to put their folks, their Sea Org people, in street clothes that were not uniforms, that would have tax consequences to that individual. Much like what we face when we buy uniforms for staff. It can be taxable if they are street clothes. For example, your shirts, those are taxable. So that was my understanding, that was a part of the concern.
Okay, well, that's good, some context. And just for the record, I don't like commenting on people's clothing or attire, or I know that there are presence down there with uniforms, but I'm not gonna, make that a deal, at all. One of the things I don't like to do, and you all probably don't either, is to waste your time. And so if we're engaging with people, with one of the biggest property owners downtown, I don't want to have to go through the whole story 5 different times to work our way up. And so is where Councilmember Hamilton said you never know who you're talking to or what kind of a response or follow-through. I think we should, speak with Mr. Miscavige or the head of the church or whoever has some decision-making authority that will have follow-through. I just think that that's efficient. A couple of comments about Mayor Hibbert about the responses from your survey. I didn't do a survey, but I did door knocking and had very similar kinds of responses. Younger people seem to be a lot more open to, that wasn't their first priority, what downtown and the Church of Scientology. However, most door knocks included, it's interesting, they included this phrase, and it's almost word for word for each, it very, very frequently is, what are you going to do about Scientology? What are you going to do about Scientology as in an action? And so it's interesting. So some people want you to do something, but then another part of, could be that same conversation with that person is, you just need to move downtown, further east or something. You need to find some other location for downtown. So, you can't have both. But I think at the heart of it, people are not ready to give up on downtown. They don't want to cede downtown. And I think that when great things are going on downtown, people come downtown or down to the beachfront. So certainly I think the relationship should be open. We should continue to pursue it and knock on the door and hopefully expect a response. And just move forward in a real matter-of-fact way. And again, like, Councilmember Hamilton, we're going to move forward and we're not going to stop and wait, right? I'm not waiting for anybody. If you're not going to get on board here and move forward, we're going without you. You can jump on later. But it's, that's kind of my feel about it.
Vice Mayor?
Well, I've been thinking about this for probably 2 decades, at least, because I've been involved with downtown and on one board or another, and even before I came on council. And just being down here with Scientology near us, I've always had, and I don't know whether I'm just an eternal optimist. I am an optimist. but I think I've always had this feeling that Scientology does want to have a vibrant downtown. That's the end result they'd like to have, because not really for our benefit, but for their benefit. And their benefit is if they can get more people worldwide to come here to their, to Clearwater. A lot of people come in with money, and if they can say, well, we have the #1 beach and we got a vibrant downtown, it's going to be able to be a better sales pitch, besides coming to take courses at their building. So I've always thought that they really do want a vibrant downtown. I was invited to the Fort Harrison when I wasn't on council. I was just, they invited a lot of stakeholders, the people downtown that were involved with downtown. And I got invited when Miscavige was there, and he put on a show for the stakeholders before they were trying to pitch buying the CMA property before you guys made a decision to sell it, to buy it into the city. And they had all the, their John Travolta and, all their big Hollywood people there. And I looked, I've been a builder for a long time. I know development, and the people they had sitting up at the table next to Miscavige were not just, good people, architects, engineers, and developers. They were the best in the world. And I know he paid a pretty penny to bring them there. So to make a long story short, he went through the whole thing about, here's what I'm going to do for your downtown. And he showed pictures, flyovers, and these were Hollywood produced stuff. So I know he spent millions on that to show, here's what the downtown looks like now, and here's what I'm going to do. And if you let us buy the property, we're going to make it look like this. And boom, it was like a Hollywood set, man. It was everything I had imagined since I was a kid that could happen on Cleveland Street. However, I walked out of there very disappointed because he wanted to do it himself with the snap of a finger. And that I knew would not be a good thing for downtown. He says, hey, I'll bring in any kind of steakhouse, I'll bring in anything you want downtown. If it doesn't happen organically, it's not good for my downtown. Because I can remember as a kid, we had a very vibrant downtown. People were down there. I didn't want it to be his downtown that we were doing that. I was open for, and I still am, I always have been, if David Miscavige is listening, I've always been open to working with the church for shared goals, getting a vibrant downtown. But it needs to happen organically, and it needs to happen as a partnership, and let it happen organically. There's a big difference between government and private enterprise, private sector. Private sector can make decisions on the fly and make a snap of a finger, and I'm sure he's used to doing that worldwide. Can't do it here. It needs to happen organically. So I've always been of the mindset that we need to have an open conversation, and not with the minions that I've known and worked with for decades, with David Miscavige, because he's the one that makes all the decisions. It doesn't do any good to talk to anybody here because they aren't going to relay the right information. They can't make any decisions. It's got to go all the way up to the top. So I'm making a plea to the church to open up communications with their city. It's their city as well as our city. Now, they've been here a long time. It's not like they moved in yesterday. They've been here almost 50 years. Work with the city. You want to get something done? Work with the city. Open your eyes. Work with us. We'll get something done. But to have no talk, buy up all this property, I used to think, well, he's buying it up. It's a chess game to him. He's buying it up, so he really wants to trade. Maybe he'll trade a bunch of properties that, he's bought up for the CMA property. I don't think that's true. I think now that he is buying it all up because if we fail like we have for 30 years here, he's going to do it. he's just going to do it. He doesn't need our permission. He's just going to have his people develop it, and he'll bring in things, and I think that's very sad. I think that we need to do it organically. We need to do it together. We can get it done, and it would help keep people from having this mystique of this Church of Scientology. If they knew that he was working with the city, they do it in other cities. I mean, you know, religious people do it out. I can't think of the name of the city now that the Mormons are in, but yeah, Salt Lake City. They've worked out partnerships, and I mean, look what they've done with that. But there's nothing we can do to make things illegal. I mean, we're a governmental body here. We can't outlaw Scientology. That's illegal. We can only do things within the law. So first things first, I think we need to open it up, get a good dialogue going, and hopefully we can get somewhere with it.
So let me ask you this before I move on to the other. You're still committed to downtown?
Absolutely. This is my town. And I'm not I'm not wrapping it up like I've had some people say, just give it to them and move on. No, this is where I grew up. This is where my kids and grandkids are going to live, and I'm dedicated to downtown, and I want it to be for everybody in our community.
Councilmember Beckman, just that question.
Yeah.
Still.
Absolutely committed to downtown.
Councilmember Hamilton.
Well, I'm going to provide a little cover for Mark here, in that I agree with what the Vice Mayor said, or I want to believe in what the Vice Mayor said when he says he believes Scientology wants a vibrant downtown. I want to believe that. But my old school train of thought goes back to actions speak a whole lot louder than words. And action-wise, we're seeing nothing. We know about all the properties that they've obtained, and they're all sitting vacant. You go to our permitting department. I'd be interested to know how many permits are in process for any of those properties. If they told me they've got a stack this tall of, for all these different properties in permitting because they want to do something with these properties, I'll sing hallelujah. But they're not there. They're not doing it. So again, I want to believe they want a vibrant downtown. I want a vibrant downtown without question. And I think all of us up here want a vibrant downtown without question. But actions speak louder than words. When you own a piece of property, great, congratulations, you own it. But there's a certain amount of, the ownership has two things. It has, I'm trying to remember now. Okay, you have certain things that you're allowed to do with that property. But you also have responsibility when you own property. And when you own downtown property in any city in the United States, when you own property in downtown, you're trying to do something with commercial property. You don't buy commercial property unless you know what you're going to do with it. And they're just, they're buying up property with no plan, or at least none that's being, again, they're not communicating with us, so we don't know what the plan is. We can speculate, but it goes back to the old, like I said earlier, actions speak a lot louder than words, and I'm not seeing any action, period.
Councilmember Bunk.
I wanted to address a couple of points the Vice Mayor made. You're right. David Miscavige can snap his finger and make something happen. We saw that most recently when he started to get some personal bad press at the start of COVID-19, when we saw all the Scientologist Sea Org members packed into the buses with no distancing, no masks. He went on to say it's a global bull bait, essentially a hoax at one of the Scientology events. And the press came down so hard on him that he snapped his fingers and said, okay, we're going to be the saviors here, and we're going to print out millions of copies of our booklets, put them everywhere around the world. People in New Zealand and Australia were complaining because those Scientology pamphlets were popping up in their stores. He started to put uniformed Scientologists out there with their hazmat suits and offered to go in and sanitize police stations and places like that so they can have pictures taken to put it in the press. And eventually, at the end of it, all these Sea Org members got together and posed for a lovely picture outside saying, mission accomplished, COB. The mission accomplished was to get them good press. Not so much care about the people who are living in Scientology's dorms, packing those buses. They have to be shamed into doing something. And you also mentioned, at that presentation at the Fort Harrison, it was like a big Hollywood glitzy presentation. Well, like in Hollywood, if you've ever taken the Universal Studio tour, you drive around the back lot, you'll see the fronts of these buildings, whether it's the Munsters home or the Psycho House. Usually those are facades with a pretty front, and then there's nothing behind them. Or it's an empty building, like with all the Scientology buildings that they've been purchasing around the world. They buy a historic building because they have to do something with the billions they have in their account. They can't just let it sit there. So they invest in properties to tell the Scientologists at these annual events every year, look how Scientology is expanding. While at the same time, they've personally admitted within the last several months, several times, that they really only have a few tens of thousands of members, not the 10 million members that they've been claiming all these years. So Scientology is shrinking. They need to, I believe we're seeing a phase where they're trying to coalesce here in the city. I've heard from people who said, oh, my friend is dating a Scientologist, and they've been told that everybody should move here now when the prices are low. I think to gain a little more control in the city, voting-wise. So something like this, having a suppressive person who understands how Scientology operates, does not get voted onto the council again. The other thing is, Miscavige can snap his finger and get something done. But it took, how many years? 13 or so to open the flag building, to finish that project. And when they dawdled on it and left it unfinished and open, the city fined them, and then they, of course, just fought that fine and paid far less than they should have. And how long is it going to take them to open up the L. Ron Hubbard Music Hall? Just another gigantic, pretty Scientology project here that few, if not Scientologists, will go to. So if they wanted to, if he really wanted a vibrant downtown, he could do that. He could still say, hey, Morton's, you want to open up a steakhouse here? He's not doing that. He's not. This is a unique city for Scientology. This is where the wealthiest Scientologists come to take the upper level courses, the top secret courses that you're not even allowed to hear a hint about as you're joining Scientology. So they're not trying to suck people in here in Clearwater. They're trying to suck in the big money-paying Scientologists from around the world who are on the upper levels And one thing they're able to do is say, look at the progress in Clearwater. Do you see the beautiful street full of the Way to Happiness Foundation and the Citizens Commission on Human Rights? All of these Scientology front groups. And by the way, the Citizen Commission on Human Rights is their front group set up to destroy psychiatry. You can't say a negative word about Scientology or, they'll threaten to sue you. But they literally are trying to wipe out the entire field of psychiatry, because when Dianetics, the modern science of mental health, was published in 1950, a few psychologists and psychiatrists read it and said, well, this is crap. And so they became the enemy. And this organization needs an enemy. I don't think we need to be an enemy. I think we just need to be honest and show the city that we're not under their control. And I think that would give confidence for people to come downtown. Somebody suggested to me the other day that they'd like to rename one of the streets Lisa McPherson Way. And I think that would be nice for Watterson Street. I'm going to see if they want to actually propose that to the city. But I think that's a good step. I think once we have the park up and running, I'd love to see a statue to former Mayor Gabe Casares there, with a plaque saying sparkling clear water is not for sale. And I would like to see an exhibit at the Historical Society about Scientology's entrance into the city and the process that they took to destroy lives and take over at that point. So, do I trust them? I trust Miscavige to do what Miscavige wants to do, which is whatever is in Miscavige's interest, not in the city's interest. If he wants to develop these buildings, he owns them, go ahead, or his Scientologist followers do. But he owns at least a couple blocks, and if he wanted to do something, well, he could open up that movie theater, even though this is not a great time for movies. But he could do something. I doubt we'll see that, nor will we see him in public pitching his proposal as he did in secret to individual board members back in 2017, because he's too afraid to show up in public, because he risks being handed a subpoena for one of these countless lawsuits that name him as the ultimate leader of the abuses that happen within Scientology. Again, this is not about religious beliefs. It's about the organization's actions. And again, if there's some deal we can make where it makes sense to swap some property, I have no problem with that. If Miscavige wants to sit down with me, I'm ready. I'd be happy to talk with you. But it's kind of foolhardy to think that we can become partners.
Well, I think words are powerful. We need to be careful with the words we use, because there are a lot of people in downtown that have invested a lot of money and are trying to make a go of it. And, so I do think we need to be careful with that. I do not agree that downtown has completely failed. I think there are segments that have worked very well. And I also hearken back to St. Petersburg, that literally took decades to turn around. A lot of people, when I first moved here, wouldn't go to St. Petersburg, either because there was nothing to do or because in parts of it was dangerous. Clearly that isn't the case anymore, but they always called it the 20-year overnight miracle. And, between the Cleveland streetscape improvements, the marina, the Capitol Theater, the Apex, the Nolan, I think there are the underpinnings of a turnaround. I think people just have to give downtown a chance. If you want to see downtown become something different, you have to be a part of the solution. And the way to do that is come and spend money and show other businesses that there's support for the restaurants and, you know, the Capitol Theater and other things that are downtown, and it'll build upon itself. I believe in the law of inertia. Once you get an object in motion, it tends to stay in motion and actually accelerates. It's getting it moving that's difficult. So, Ms. Aiken, did you have something to add?
I kind of have a question. I'd like to get a little clarification on what your thoughts are about what you mean by an organic process. What would that look like? Do you want public participation? Do we all sit down with planners? What is an organic process going to look like if we go and say, we want this to be organic? What does that look like?
Vice Mayor?
Okay.
You're the one who said it, so.
Yeah. What I think about organic is what's happening downtown now. You got property owners and you got businesses that move in. They're not moving in because somebody says move in. The city does offer some incentives, which is fine because it is a depressed time in downtown. It's been like that for a while. But the people who put their money where their mouth is and come down, I think it's turning. I really do. I mean, to add to what the mayor said, I mean, with this district, we were there Friday night, and the entire 400 block was packed. I mean, lots of tables on the street. They had music on the 500 block. Lots of tables on the street. People playing games, music playing. So we're starting to find a personality down there that everybody loves. That's what I mean by organic. What I don't mean is somebody that buys the downtown and then builds it like in the villages. You know, hey, this would be a good spot for downtown, and they just build one, you know. And
Contrived.
yeah, a contrived downtown. And having what Miscavige said to me that was so disappointing is that he was going to do that, basically. He wanted to come in and, using church money, remodel everything, make it into beautiful. We don't really need that to happen. But if he wants to cooperate and be a funding source, as the city is, and let people who own the properties take advantage and help that way, that's organic to me.
Well, I think downtowns are being revived all over the country. People want that authentic feel of a downtown. It occurs in different ways in different towns based upon the personality of that downtown and the state that it's in and everything else. I mean, if you go to New Orleans or Portland or Savannah, which I was in this weekend, I mean, Savannah was, goodness gracious, it was packed, you know, and a little frightening actually at times. But people were being very good about masks, and the restaurants were being good about distancing and everything else. But I think it can occur. I don't particularly like Celebration, for instance, which I think is contrived.
That movie chain? Is that what do you mean?
No, over at
Celebration?
Disney,
Over by
Oh.
Disney.
there's basically a Stepford Wives town that was, you know, built, and it's contrived. It's doesn't feel authentic. Mr. Dell could probably delve into that, or Miss Clayton, and give us, you know, which I think we've always strived for. Does that answer your question, Ms. Aiken, or do you need more clarification?
I'd like a little more. I'd like to give you a little more push. So if the church did a survey and said, we believe there is a market for X, would you consider that not to be organic? Because in many years past, they did that. They did a survey and said, we think there's a market for, I think it was a sushi place. And we were like, no, thank you. But does a survey mean that it's not organic? What steps would they take to work with us in an organic way? And then I'll stop, because I'm trying to figure out how I tell somebody what I want them to do when I say this has to be organic? What am I asking them to do? To market? To what?
Well, I mean, what you're asking is really a market study for market
Could
demand.
be.
What
And would
is
that be
missing,
okay?
what's a missing piece? I have no problem with that. I mean, any intelligent business person is going to try to find out what demand there is for whatever their service they're gonna provide. If there isn't enough demand, they're not gonna do it. For instance, Checkers is famous, and the founder of Checkers lives here in town. They didn't bother with market studies. They just made sure they were within a quarter mile of a McDonald's.
Piggyback.
Because they knew McDonald's had already done the market study to determine whether there was demand for that type of fast food. You know, I mean, clearly, I think doing market demand studies makes sense. I think we can also look at what is missing in our downtown versus other successful models. I think we all know that there are certain holes within downtown, right, of types of restaurants. We don't really have retail. Retail is, you know, certainly not doing well in COVID, and the Amazoning of retail and everything else is changing that landscape. But again, going to Savannah, they didn't have the chains that were doing well, but they still had a lot of funky little retail places that were unique, that were doing great, that were packed. I think that's the type of thing that works. But usually that comes about by somebody who's passionate about that particular type of retail or restaurant. And I think that goes back to the Vice Mayor's comment about being authentic.
Thank you, that's helpful.
Miss Sanderson had her hand up too, to come and speak.
Come on,
I don't want to speak on behalf of.
wait until you get to the mic, Denise.
Sorry.
I want everyone at home to be able to hear your words of wisdom.
Well, I'm not sure that they're wisdom, but I was reminded, Denise Sanderson, Director of Economic Development and Housing, that we have done 2 retail recruitment strategies in the last several years. So one was driven by our CRA. This is prior to my arrival in 2012, so probably around the 2010 timeframe. There was, do we recruit retail first and then office will come, et cetera? And then more recently, in partnership with the Church of Scientology and Clearwater Downtown Partnership, there was a retail recruitment strategy. I'm not sure that there was success with either of those. And so I just wanted to remind council of that because I think there are a lot of new members who may not remember those activities.
And the church participated in that study?
They did. They hired a firm, Highbridge, I think springs to mind, and partnered with Downtown Partnership in that effort.
Councilmember Bunker.
I just wanted to throw in one other thing that I just remembered. In the podcast I did recently with Leah Remini, she was talking about, Vice Mayor had mentioned that, Scientology wants a vibrant downtown for their parishioners. Well, Leah pointed out that when she came here to stay at the Fort Harrison, they would force her to put money on their dinner plan within the Fort Harrison. She said, well, I want to check out some of the restaurants. No. You spend your money here. And I think that's the general feeling.
Mr. Horn, you have anything to add? Because I want to move on.
Okay, I would say, while that might have been something that was done years ago, I think if you go to the restaurants downtown now, and especially when Clear Sky opened, that was one of the things highlighted to me, that they had significant patronage, from residents of Water's Edge and other members of the church who patronize Clear Sky. So I don't know whether that historical thing really applies right now. It seems like the downtown's getting a lot of attention. I just wanted to remind all of you that from especially our newer council members, from a municipal service delivery perspective, at least the whole time I've been here, we have not had any difficulty working with the church in getting them to fulfill their private property ownership roles as it relates to municipal issues. And we've gotten same kind of cooperation we would expect from them as we would expect them from others. I do want to correct for the record that the fine that the city charged them, they ended up paying at least $435,000 in fines. That fine went through our normal process. The Municipal Code Enforcement Board listened to the argument the church made as to why it took 12 years to complete, and they evaluated it, decided there was no basis to reduce it, and that's what they paid, and they paid it without complaint. So I just wanted to make sure that record reflected that. I understood what you.
Correct.
Yeah. And so lastly, the significance of this conversation for me and for our staff is that one of the things that I've learned over time is that our staff wants to know that it's doing the right thing. It wants to know that that they are not having interactions with the church institution that is not appropriate. So hearing your sentiments on moving forward and the various and sundry comments that you've made, I think makes it clear to us that the path we've been on in municipal delivery and our relationships and the conversations, the few that I've had, and Pam, I think have been consistent with your, at least the majority of your views. So that's all I have there.
All right. Well, let's move on to thoughts on a strategic plan. When do we want to update the plan? Citizens' input is critical. How do we engage during COVID-19, or do we wait? What should be priorities in the strategic plan? Job creation, workforce housing, transportation, environmental issues, planning, zoning, encouraging reinvestment in housing stock, equity issues. How do we serve the entire city? That looks like, I don't know where the 10 is. Oh, there it is. How do we serve the entire city with projects and money? Do we spend money where it is generated, or do we subsidize less affluent areas? What, from our previous plans, do you like or dislike? What have you seen in other strategic plans that you want to emulate? What do you want final product to include? Do we have time frames and analytics that can be measured? So who wants to start? Councilmember Beckman?
I can start. I mean, it won't be like a finish, but it will be a start. So I sent you all a copy of the county strategic plan as well as Largo's strategic plan, just to take a look at. I don't know if you had an opportunity to do that. I kind of like Largo and especially the county's strategic plan. One striking difference between our strategic plan and the county's is the county has an equal emphasis on practicing superior environmental stewardship. That our strategic plan doesn't mention the environment anywhere on the page. Actually. And I had a question because I went to, print this out in color again, and I'm wondering if it's even on our city website. I could not find it. It wasn't intuitive, the one-page kind of a chart, which says City of Clearwater vision and then mission. So obviously, and it's not a surprise to you all, that I would like the environment to be on level ground with economic development and safety and public health and safety. So, that's one thing. I don't think we should wait until COVID is over or we have a vaccine. That's just too much unknown, and this is too important. to go forward. I think citizen engagement and feedback is a critical part, and I'm not exactly sure how best to get citizen feedback on priorities and what they think of our strategic plan and how it could be improved. But, I have confidence we can figure something out. But we've got business and development in multiple areas, and the environment and quality of life, it needs a little larger emphasis. And I don't want to, I don't think we should wait. I think it's critical. I think, and as we move forward and hire a new city manager, it'd be great to have an idea of what our view is of the city and our long-term goals. And I think we need to have measurable, goals that have numbers attached to them, metrics.
I didn't feel like the county and
and Largo.
Largo had that. That was one of the things I found interesting,
Yeah.
that you liked them, because they really don't have any measurable metrics.
Well, I think, the county has a sustainability and a sustainability coordinator, and then an energy, I forget what his title is, or his or her title is related to the energy, but I think that they're setting measurable goals. I could be wrong. But we can certainly add them into our green print if it's not in the strategic plan.
Well, I do know who did the strategic planning with the county, because it's the same person that we hired for Ruth Eckerd Hall's strategic plan. And one of his goals is to always have a one-pager at the end of the process. Now, there's a lot of other supporting documents that can be referenced in that one-page strategic plan, but it's something that, and was important to me, was to have a document that you could have with you at all times, that you could reference back to. Whereas when the whole document is voluminous, it tends to get lost. Whereas this really set priorities. But one of the things I want us to talk about is, we can start to create the bones for the strategic plan and go out then to the citizens and see what they agree with. Or you start with going out to the citizens and seeing what their greatest priorities are, and then you come back and, synthesize their ideas into the strategic plan. It's two different ways of going about it. Back when we did it in '04, we had public meetings at every single library and rec center. And we had large crowds where we went through an introduction, but then we allowed the citizens to vote on what they thought the priorities were. And that's how we synthesized the strategic plan down.
I think we should start with some kind of bones that we approach the citizens, not a blank sheet of paper, for sure. We could give them samples. They could, like I sent you links of different, styles of a strategic plan. We could do that with some of the residents, but certainly they need to, I think people should start with something,
Okay.
What do you think about the timeline, though? You think it's a big priority?
Well, my only concern is I don't want people to think that we're doing it during COVID-19 and leaving them out of the process, which people have accused us of with the landings. And it's very difficult to do things the way we normally do them with COVID-19. It's impossible to do it the way we normally do things. Because if we were doing it today, we'd pack this room, we'd do an initial presentation, and then we'd have vignettes, and people would go around and kind of give their input directly with what they think are their priorities. We'd take all that back, synthesize it down, and move on. And that just is very difficult to do. Now, maybe public communications has the ability to put together something that people can participate, but I think people tend to participate more when they are person to person. You may get a lopsided view. You always have people that are more engaged than others. They just are. There are certain people within our community that are more engaged. You want to get some of the people that may not be as easy to engage. There's a lot of families with kids, they maybe can't come out, to some of the meetings, or you want to know what matters to them. They're an important component to the community. So, Vice Mayor?
What if, one thing that COVID has taught us is that online meetings work. I think the whole country is really looking at things we probably wouldn't have looked at before and said, the normal business meeting before was a flight somewhere, gathering in a central location, hotels. Now you can do it with Zoom. And I've had meetings where I just was on one last week where I'm not even sure how many people were on it, but a lot of people were on that. We had some people that spoke, and maybe there's a way that we could do it and break it up in parts of the city. Maybe have a North Clearwater Zoom meeting that we could do. Typically what we used to do here is charrettes. And we'd use like a room like this, and you'd have somebody that would run it. And then everybody would sit at tables, and we'd get ideas, and then people would sit down and kind of work the idea out, and we put it on, stick things on the wall, and everybody could see it. And I think they work fine, but I don't know why we couldn't do that with a kind of a Zoom meeting. We could try it at least and see if that would work. Then do one maybe, in Morningside area, and then one on the beach communities. We could advertise that this date would be one, this date would be another one, and try to do it that way where we can get in people that would have families and kids feel like they could get on their computer easier than coming somewhere and participate. Just a thought. I think we could put it out there to maybe our communications department and see what they can come up with.
The county certainly has a high level of participation, especially if they're discussing masks and other things. They've had a lot of engagement.
On both sides.
Both sides, yep.
Councilmember Hamilton.
We're clearly we're sailing a different sea than we're used to with all this. And I think, trying to create something, love to throw stuff on Joelle's plate, to create, and she's wearing that mask so I can't see exactly the face she's giving me.
The scowl.
But, I think we should try to create something, Zoom, on the Zoom profile possibly, where we could do, I like the idea of, you do separate areas, because different areas have different priorities and different ideas. And we can gather that information, because this isn't something, there's not, to my understanding and my belief, I don't think we have a deadline as to when we have to have this done. We just need to work towards it and get, something we're happy with and that we're all comfortable with. And hopefully by doing it via Zoom, we gather a certain amount of information, and as we're doing that, hopefully this pandemic starts to subside and we get on top of it and we come up with a vaccine. But let's face it, even when we get to the other side of this and there's a vaccine, there's still going to be some people that just are still not going to be comfortable going out. Don't know how you're going to reach those people, but we're going to have to adjust on the fly, so to speak. But I like the idea of starting with the Zoom, getting it so that we can then take it out and have 3 or 4 meetings around the city after we've gathered the other information and been able to digest it down and meld it together and take it out to the public for round 2. But then eventually at some point it comes down to the 5 people sitting here. They're going to have to say this is the final product. But But I like the idea of starting it that way.
Councilmember Bunker?
Yeah, I definitely agree with the Zoom method. I've been in plenty of Zoom calls that have people from all over the country participating. Even if your camera and microphone isn't active, you can still type in questions or comments, and those can be read by a moderator. So it is a good way to get a lot of feedback. My worry is that, we're going to hear from the same set of people who email us constantly. So if we can open it up and bring in more of the community, and still hear from those folks who regularly contact us, that would be terrific. And doing that from home is probably going to be much easier for most people in the city. I would like to point out one other thing, Councilmember Beckman, I appreciate the links you sent. I did look over both of those strategic plans. The county didn't set goals specifically, but also on their website with that, they did impress me by the number of stats they proceeded to point out. Just everything that they've done, including, 3 days to fill a pothole. How many hundreds of thousands of pets were neutered or spayed? It was remarkable how much they reported that this is what the county has achieved this year.
Well, I mean, there can be priorities that are set, which really is what you want out of a strategic plan. You want priorities, you want some guiding principles that, if you're deviating significantly from the priorities and guiding principles, you're getting out of bounds. Or there's got to be a real reason that you're departing from what you've decided that their council and the citizens of Clearwater believe are the priorities. There may be occasions when you want to do that, but they shouldn't be common. Mr. Horn, let me ask you something. How would you feel about coming into a new job with a recently formed strategic plan that you had very little to do with?
Well, since I believe that my role is to support the council, I would come in with the idea that the council has at least up to that point laid out a strategic plan and its priorities. My job is to implement. That would give me at least a year to see how the strategic plan operates and how effective it is. And then I can then begin to at least express some interest in how it moves forward in the second year. I wouldn't necessarily have to come in trying to figure out what do I need to create. I can kind of get up to speed with where everything is, where the council thinks it wants to go, and then make adjustments. But I mean, that's how I would approach it.
You don't need to have your fingerprints all over it, is my point.
I don't. Okay, I don't. Depends on who you recruit in as your manager, because you may bring some managers in who may be quite different than me and have a different approach.
So when we ask the question of when we want to update the plan, it sounds like sooner than later. We don't necessarily want to wait. That we can get through the process of getting citizen engagement, and that we want to drive some of the overarching priorities, but not necessarily prioritize them. That would be something that would be driven by citizens. Is that what I'm hearing?
That's the way I'd look at it.
Okay. One of the things that I like to come out of this, and this is one of the reasons I don't believe in districts, is having served on this council on and off now for almost 11 years, is I think that over the many different councils that have been here, we've always done a very good job of seeing where the need is within the community and trying to fill it. And, at one time we had the beach, Island Estates, and Sand Key that were talking about seceding
Yeah.
because they felt like they were funding a lot of things on the mainland. And then I hear a lot of people say from the mainland, our focus is always the beach. And, you know, it's this balancing act. And that's one of the reasons I never liked districts is I didn't want people to say, okay, I'll support your thing if now you support my thing for your district, you know. And this, coming from Chicago, this horse trading was something that went on all the time in the different, by the different aldermans. Now, Chicago is a good example of a bad example. So I don't think I want to follow any of their direction, but oftentimes you learn more from a bad example than a good example, but anyway.
Well, can I, so I don't, you know, I know we made suggestions about what should be on our philosophical discussion list, but, you know, this 1D at the top of my list, so I think we're on 10D or whatever.
We're on 9.
Yeah, how we serve the entire city with projects and money. Do we spend money where it is generated, or do we subsidize less affluent areas? I mean, there's no way I would ever think that money stays in the area that it's generated only. And so I just want to be clear with that. The money that's generated in our tax base is for the entire city and for the quality of life for all of our residents. And you're right, I knocked on doors at Island Estates, not too many at Sand Key because there aren't very many, you know, accessible doors. But yeah, a number of people in the most expensive homes in Clearwater said, you know, I pay big taxes. Why don't I have this or that? And they've got everything on Island Estates. And so, you know, and literally, some people, and it's a, you know, a handful or whatever, but would point, you know, why is my money going all over there? Well, you know, that's where people live. That's where the people who do your nails or mow your yard or cook your food or whatever, people live there, and we take care of each other. And so, you know, that one just struck me as like, wow, why is that question even being asked? But I just, you know. And
Why is it being asked here, or why is it being asked out there?
Well,
It's being asked out here, that's why it's being asked here.
yeah, I mean, but I just found it curious it was on our list, but.
Because I want to know what your philosophy is, and you just gave it.
There you go.
And if the question wasn't asked,
Yeah.
then I wouldn't know.
I know, I get it.
And I think, not to interrupt, but I think it's, there's also a balance there, you know. Let's face it, the beach generates a ton of money for the entire city. So we want to make sure that the beach remains in the best condition it can possibly be, so that it continues to generate that revenue that we can use for the rest of the city. So, yeah, we do spend some money out on the beach, but it pays a great dividend back to us, that gives us the money to invest in some things that don't really give us a return, but do maintain the quality of life that people in Clearwater generally have the opportunity to enjoy. Now, obviously, you know, everybody's got their personal, you know, I need the pothole in front of my house fixed, and I need my sidewalk in my neighborhood fixed, and we have limited resources to do all those. We can't do all. We'd love to be able to do all those, but you know, it frustrates me on some of those things because, you know, you want your and even in my own neighborhood, and I'm going to get in trouble when I go home tonight for this, but you know, people say, you know, we need to fix the sidewalks in my neighborhood, and it's like, why am I going to worry about fixing the sidewalks in my neighborhood when everybody that walks my neighborhood walks in the street? They don't walk on the sidewalk. They walk on the street. So it's like, why do I need to fix the sidewalk? So it's you know, but you're never going to satisfy everybody. But I think we do a very good job of staying focused on the things that absolutely need attention. And I don't think you change change what you're doing. I think you continue to, stay the course.
Vice Mayor?
Yeah, and I have to agree with Councilmember Beckman on this. We are a city. This is our city, and we have areas that make more money than other areas, but everything should be spent to make the city. We should not have any depressed areas that need constant work that we never give money to. So my philosophy is the same, and I agree with Councilman Hamilton too. Some of these things you've got to keep up in order to keep the money coming in, but I think that money should be spent that goes into Clearwater's coffer on Clearwater, and wherever it's needed, that's where we need to be spending it.
I hope it's not a surprise to anyone that I wholeheartedly agree with Councilmember Beckman and with the Vice Mayor that we are one city, and we should be lifting up everyone and making sure that if we're giving developers hundreds of thousands of dollars to give their building curb appeal, where there are whole neighborhoods that need some curb appeal help. And we can't just say, oh, that money was made at the beach, so you're out of luck. We do have to, of course, look after the beach, but still take care of the entire city.
Well, just for the record, we've always done that. It's one of the reasons. This isn't just for us to hear, it's also for people that watch and listen, that they understand that there are different pockets of money and buckets, and it does get spread around. And what I get concerned about is, I come from a family of 6, so there was always sometimes, well, she got more than I did, and he got more than I did, And we have that sometimes in the city. And what we do is, I've always said, we triage the entire city because we have limited resources. And we see where resources are needed because we have an issue, or maybe we need more police coverage, or maybe we really do need to freshen up a neighborhood, their park. And that's why we have cycles in which things are refreshed. But we can't refresh the entire city all at once. We kind of put things on a cycle, and we look at how far is too far to go for a recreation center, a library. Island Estates does not have a library, and it doesn't have a rec center, so it doesn't have everything. The beach has most everything, but they don't have a rec center like Morningside or Countryside has. Why? The land's so stinking expensive, even if we wanted to build one, we couldn't. And so they have to drive into town if they want a more significant rec center. They've got one of the great rec centers of all. It's called the Beach. But it's different, There's nowhere else that can have a sailing center except out on the water. So we kind of pick and choose where we're going to do different things that benefits the whole city. And then there's some neighborhoods. My neighborhood doesn't have a park, it doesn't have a rec center, and that's okay. And we pay a fair amount of taxes. We just have to drive a few miles to get to some of those things. All right. 10, I think, is really important. And I don't think we're going to answer these questions today, by the way. But I think it certainly has been, the light has been shown upon this. What are the appropriate levels of service for all sorts of things that we provide? Be it police. There are some people that want to defund police in other cities. I don't support that in Clearwater. I think we're at the right level. I have been in some of the minority neighborhoods that actually want more police. I went out and visited some households, and they're concerned about all sorts of things. The right levels for fire, the right levels for parks and recreation, libraries, trails, How much parkland is the right amount? Because none of it is free. Everything we do has a price tag. One of the things I would like to come out of the strategic plan that may not be on the strategic plan, but that is supporting, is what are the right levels and how are we going to determine those? And for that, I turn more to the staff to give us metrics, standards. We originally talked about 14, the fact that we had 14 acres per 1,000 people, and now there's been arguments about, well, what does Parks and Rec look like? Do we count soccer fields? Then I've also heard people say Cooper's Point doesn't matter because it's not accessible, but it is green space or wildlife preservation. So I think we need to define these things better than we have, so that when we say we have enough of something, we have enough. Or maybe we don't have enough of something, and that's one of the goals we want to work towards. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that subject. Councilmember Hamilton.
I think, some of these, such as police and fire, I'm not qualified to say what the proper level is, but and Chief, you don't have to come up, but if I remember correctly, when you took over, I think we had 270 officers or something, and we're down about 30 officers from when you took over.
Come on up, Chief.
Come on up, Chief. But I know, but this guy knows what the right number or what the number is that he needs and what it should be a lot better than I do.
Good afternoon, Dan Slater, Chief of Police. So I think when Councilmember Hamilton was going to, when I took over, we were probably around 228. At one point in the heyday when grants were very, very prevalent, the city was probably near 270, 268, somewhere around there. We're currently at 245. I've always felt that kind of 250 is a sweet spot, but in police management, you're not going to necessarily even just use a sworn ratio. The easy and lazier way is to kind of just do population to a ratio. In reality, you really want to kind of look at like discretionary time and make sure that your officers have a certain level of discretionary time. And we probably have started to shrink in that particular area, but we've put a lot of focus on quality of life issues. So I kind of consider a lot of those quality of life issues discretionary time. So
explain what discretionary time for an officer really is.
So an officer, mostly in the patrol division, would be responding to generated calls for service. We receive a phone call, input A, officer gets the call, address, problem, goes out there, addresses the problem, researches the right reports. You want your zone officers to have some time to basically police, to respond to what the community needs are, to what the problems are, and to do preventative measures and not just be completely reactionary. So we want them to have this component of proactive work. So that's probably, I think, a better focal point. We haven't done a deep dive study on that, quite honestly, and it would probably require a consultant to really get that deep to go that far. DC Gandy's here as well. He runs our operations for the department side. He can certainly speak to what his pulse is on his feeling as well, but I think we're pretty unified in believing that we have kind of shrunk into that discretionary time, but the caveat to that is a lot of it's being spent on quality of life issues that I think are probably appropriate and a very big concern from our citizens and I believe the council as well.
That's a great example of he knows a lot more about it than I ever will. So, that being said, and libraries, I think we've all heard it said before that our county has one of the best library systems anywhere. We've got a great library system. We have, just since you and I have been on here, we've built, 4 new libraries? Mm-hmm. I mean, so we're, I think our level of service there is great. But as you say, parks, trails, they're great to have, but they're not free. And, there's how much money are we willing to, budget and tell the manager this is what we want and this is what we're this is our pain threshold for that. It'll be an interesting conversation, that's for sure.
Vice Mayor?
well, I don't want to get into the hierarchy of services, but I guess the only thing I would say here is that everything has a cost. And the people have to know that, you know. Since I've been on council, I've been amazed at the facilities that we have are top notch in every department. And I said this at our last meeting, you know, just take the water department, for instance, and what we go through to give our customers and the citizens clean water and clear water, safe, clean water. You know, waste products too. I mean, we have facilities all throughout Clearwater that take care of that. And those are things people don't think about. They just think, well, it's just one of those things that should happen naturally. It doesn't. I mean, it's a big cost and a big system to take care of. I can tell you already, you know, as far as police and fire, public safety is always, and has always been and will always be to me, number one, is giving our citizens the best police and fire service that we can. So that's going to always be important in my book. I mean, I couldn't tell you either, as Mr. Hamilton said, what we need for our community, but I know, talking to the chief, the fire chief, I know they look at, before they just build a fire station, where's the best place to have that? And if it's out on the border of our city, can we share with another city to come in and do the same with them? So we're just not building them everywhere. I mean, there's a lot of logic and thought that go into this to give us the best service. And so to me, this is I mean, we could probably talk hours on this one subject. What's the appropriate level of service? We want our citizens to have everything, and we're pretty lucky. Even the parks. Somebody was mentioning to me like how great the park was in Largo. Well, they do have a great park. I remember there used to be, wasn't the county fair there at one time? I used to go over there and see that. Now it's a beautiful park. It's lit. And I say, well, you know, we have hundreds of parks in Clearwater. They're not as big as that, but we've got some parks that are as big as that, and you know, we just don't have one park. We've got hundreds of them because we spread them out. People enjoy that. That's one of the things that makes our community stand out above all other communities around us. Clearwater is very special to me and its citizens. I mean, we do give a lot of services for living here. Safety one, then we have, you know, the statement, best place to live, work, and play. We got it all. I mean, you know, we're whatever we can do to build up more jobs in Clearwater will be good for us. And how we enjoy in our spare time is important, and then the safety aspect is, I think, the most important.
Councilmember Vogler.
For most people, I think, when they think of the city, they'll think of the things that they actually interact with most, like a library or a park. Or then there are other things that you don't want to think about, like a water bill. So as far as what gets, you know, the priority, well, they're all important. Certainly, police and fire are I think, the most important to keep everybody safe. There was another point I wanted to make, and I've forgotten what it is now. It was something off of what the vice mayor said. But I'll have to come back to you on that.
Okay. Bill, how would you want to go about discussing what the appropriate levels of service are for some of the different departments?
Well, the way I'd like to begin by saying that our departments derive their budgets around what they have to maintain, the infrastructure. And at some point in time, they started this process, and it's ongoing. It's when we decide to add to that responsibility, what emerges is the issue of quality of service and or levels of service. And that's where we get into a little bit of a debate, and usually it stems from a citizen who wants something that we are actually not budgeted to provide because we've determined, at least in the previous budget, that we were appropriately funded to take care of it. And and just let me give you an example. When I first got here, we decided that we had a much larger, in terms of employees, staff of Parks and Recreation, and we did a lot of things internally. We had a beautification division that, you know, did all your landscaping maintenance and all that sort of thing. And then we got to a point where we hit the recession and we really had to make some reductions. And we learned that when we take care of things ourselves, it truly does reflect a higher level of service. It's absolutely beautiful. I mean, you couldn't find a place that had landscaping that wasn't really well maintained. Well, when we had to reduce our budgets to recognize our budget limitations, then we had to find alternative ways of addressing that need. So we started outsourcing some of the landscape maintenance in areas where it didn't need to be as pristine as other areas. And you could actually see the difference. And so what happens sometimes is the citizens want that higher level of service, but we're really not staffed to provide it. So it's helpful to kind of know what is the pecking order. And clearly, when it comes to public safety, I mean, the lion's share of your general fund budget is going to be committed to police and fire and Parks and Recreation to a certain extent. And why do I say that? When we hit the recession, the worst recession in history, everybody took a little bit of a haircut, but police and fire, you know, was pretty well maintained. We didn't close one library. We didn't close one rec center. And I had the discussion with the council. The mayor remembers this. Because I wanted to know, you know, what do we want? You know, what do you want to do? Where do you think you're going to take some real hits from the community on reductions? And it was pretty obvious that certain quality of life issues, as we experience this recession, were still important to the community. So clearly, I think reinforcing the prominence of public safety, and that's not taking anything away from public utilities, because water sewer has funding that keeps us in good shape there and keeps the staffing where it needs to be. Parks and Recreation did take some cuts, and they're still suffering from some of those cuts right now. And so the question really is, you know, kind of, you know, how do we address some of those areas? Libraries, I think we're fine when it comes to libraries. So, Mayor, to your question, I think part of it deals with what you get back from the public as we move in this strategic planning segment. What are you hearing? You know, where have we now missed the mark in some areas where the public feels like it needs to get higher levels of service? I don't think you're going to really have a good feel for that until you get some feedback from the public. You know, the staff is going to fund, you know, as best we are going to budget what we've got. But I have not really focused on going out and adding more cost to our government to pursue some increased level of service. And I wouldn't do that without you all being a part of that conversation.
Well, I think Largo is a really good example to look at because they've decided to go a different direction than we have.
Mm-hmm.
So, for instance, they have one main library, you know, and it's 90,300 square feet. I only know that because it was built a couple of years after ours. Ours was 90,000 square feet, theirs is 90,300. And if you don't think that was on purpose, I think they've got 2 rec centers, you know, whereas we have the beach, we have the sailing center, we have North Greenwood, Ross Norton, Long Center, Morningside, Countryside. We've decided that we're gonna have a much higher level of service, that people are not going to have to drive as far. And going back to the recession that Mr. Horn was talking about, we didn't decide to eliminate anything, we just spread the peanut butter a lot thinner. So, you know, we didn't close the library,
Right.
we just may not have every library open at every hour.
Correct.
So it rotated around, same thing with the rec centers. That was the way we dealt with it, rather than, you know, kind of punishing one region of the city by them losing their facility. And so from a facility standpoint, I personally believe we're done. I mean, I think we have enough rec centers. I think we have enough libraries. One of my main concerns is funding depreciation. Because if you defer maintenance on these buildings, first of all, it's not only the structures, but it's the operations with humans that actually provide service. If you start to skimp on that, you're gonna run into much bigger problems down the road when you defer maintenance and don't keep places up. And also, the quality of the experience starts to diminish. But, you know, I mean, you see that right now in a lot of different facilities. People are deferring maintenance right now because their budgets are skinny. You know, they don't have the revenue coming in. And I want to make sure as a city we never get to that point. And whenever you bring online another facility that you have to maintain, you either have to cut something from somewhere else or you've got to increase revenues. And right now it's pretty hard to increase revenues, so. But I would like us to go through the exercise department by department and, you know, put a check by the ones we think are right-sized. And if there's areas that we think we need to expand, how much is it gonna cost? What is the right level? And where are we gonna get the resources?
Okay.
And I think that's something that can be passed on to other councils. Councilmember Beckman.
I would agree with you too, that I think we need to maintain what we have. We have very nice facilities, libraries, rec centers, and I'm all about maintaining them. I don't have any indication from residents that there's this big push for adding libraries or rec centers. I haven't heard anything. I wanted, because you started out the conversation about money and priorities, and you mentioned that you weren't in favor of defunding the police, and I just wanted to make a statement. In my understanding of what defunding the police means, and I hate that phrase, I've hated it from the very first time I heard it, but my understanding is it means taking some of the resources and reallocating them to social work or counseling or interventions that way. So it doesn't mean taking money away from the police. I think it's putting it into more counseling and, you know, family services or crisis, whatever those kinds of things are. So I just wanted to make that statement. I don't know if you all agree or that's your understanding, but it's mine. And then in
So do
the,
you agree with that, moving some of the monies from police
I believe that
into
some.
those areas?
I think it depends on each different police force, what their needs are. If they see that they need more, you know, street outreach or social workers, then if a police chief were to tell me, I need some resources for social work or street outreach, I'd trust that police chief. Yeah, I mean, I think it's, yeah, a valid thing. And then we talked about clarification about defining better when we have enough of something. And you use the word, we're having kind of arguments about that ratio of parkland per resident and, or green space. And I think in the vein of being real transparent, we do need to clarify what that acreage is. Is it accessible by residents? Is it parkland? Is it protected wetland? What is it? Are these fields that, here's another thing, are these fields, these recreational fields that we have that are locked up and gated and taken care of by our city workers? So they're, field lines are painted and the fields are kept at a certain level for, play. But if they're locked up, then that ball field down the street in my neighborhood, my kid can't go there and kick a soccer ball or practice, field goal attempts or whatever, because it's locked up. That's not a usable green space, or park for our residents necessarily. So I think we need to be real transparent about that too. I mean, where I grew up, our elementary school was right through my backyard. No fence. We just walked through the backyard, went to elementary school, came home for lunch, all that stuff. And we had a park right behind it where the public school park was open to everybody to go play tennis or play football or basketball. And now, with school shootings and everything's fenced up and kids, don't have places to go. My heart is broken about that. But when we talk about parks, there is a clarification about which ones are accessible or not, or which ones you have to have an organized football team or baseball team that pays to get access to the field and they go on. And so I think that's part of being transparent with our residents about that. When you mention, again, parks also aren't free, one thing that I would come back and say is that it's been shown that parks and open spaces increase property value when they're around them, unless you're in downtown, Chicago across from Maggie Daley Park or so. Well, of course, Maggie Daley Park's right there. But anyway, there is value added with green space. And then finally, I guess, we're talking about what level of service is appropriate for like police or fire. I mean, I have no means to comment on that. I mean, I would say if our insurance carrier is saying this is, we're at the highest level of service with, the number of ladder trucks and the time that we have to get to a call, all that is beyond what I know to comment on. But if we're looking at a hierarchy, and you mentioned a hierarchy, Maslow's hierarchy of needs starts with physiological needs, and that's, we need to breathe, we need clean air, we need water, sewer, we need housing, we need shelter. So all those things are first, and then we have safety, and then you have, love and belonging, and then you have self-actualization and all that. But, to have clean air, infrastructure, safety, a home, all those are right there as our foundation. So that's all I got to say about that.
Councilmember Bunker.
Well, Councilmember Beckman is right that defund the police is a horrible, horrible statement. But I think the chief has talked about the fact that, officers are required to do so many things beyond policing. They have to be marriage counselors, they got to, be mental health professionals, essentially. And I believe there are cities that work with the police department and other agencies to get the right people to whatever is needed at the 911 call. That doesn't mean, oh boy, let's not give the police money. It just means maybe there's some smarter ways to handle some of the calls that come in. I remember the little inconsequential thing that I forgot before from the Vice Mayor's comments. The Largo Park, I just remember at Christmas time driving past that, and it was so beautifully lit that gave me an impression about the city of Largo. And their library being right by that. That's our library too, because our library systems are intertwined. And I love the fact that we can go there and check out something, whether it's a book, CD, DVD, or a puzzle, and then return it at our local library when we have a chance, and it gets to the right spot. So that's a way that I love the way our system is set up to help people in all the local communities.
Well, 10 kind of spilled into 11. I've heard different statements, so kind of heard from everybody to an extent on that. I think one of the things I want to talk about briefly is just private property rights. And, we heard a lot about limiting development. And I just kind of wanted to hear everyone's philosophy on that. We still do have private property rights in this country. And if you own a piece of property, you do have the right to use it for something. I think fortunately it's not in our city, but Dunedin's going to go through a very interesting debate over the 44 acres that Ms. Hackworth left. And I think there's a lot of people that want to see that turned into green space. Yet at the same time, there's an error. I was just curious what everybody's, opinions were about that, because it drives things. It drives what we can do with land and development and everything else. And what I want is also citizens to hear some of this, because I think it injects reality into the conversation. Because a lot of times we'll have, and I do think we've got some problems. I've talked to Gina about this, where different zonings collide. And that's a really tough situation where you have residential meeting commercial or residential meeting industrial. But both zonings have a right to do something with their property. Vice Mayor?
Yeah, I remember on the beach, when the way they figured that the land differences in the zoning, the old Florida district kind of gave a chance for some of the bigger developments to go down and meet, the residential on the north end of the beach. But that wasn't as abrupt as some of the ones that have come up before us, where you have something that comes right up abruptly to, where there's no transition area. And I don't really know how we would do that unless we, you had a transition area that would go down from, let's say if you had an area that was had a limit of 10 stories, and then you had residential that would support 3, whether you had a buffer area that would go down to maybe 7 before you hit that. I think that worked well, at least on Clearwater Beach. But as you know, I'm a big property rights guy. I think that if you have a stake in property and you can do anything that lawfully you're able to do with that property, and it's kind of up to the city for us to think about how we're buffering those areas, because we do have, there's some areas that comes and have just open zoning, and I've seen that where they don't care what you put. You could put a commercial development in the residential development, and that hasn't worked well. I think ours works better than most, but we do, when we look at some of the areas of the city, and we're completely built out, so we're a redevelopment community. We have everything's already been built. If something new is going to be built, something's got to come down for it to be built. So I think that in that vein, that's a little bit easier to try to figure. If it's already a residential property, you're not going to be able to build a commercial piece on that property. So, but I don't believe that some of the objections we've heard from people when somebody's already bought up property, that they can't legally build what they bought the property for. So I'm going to stick mostly with the property owner on that one.
Pam, do you just want to go over Burt Harris real quick?
Burt Harris addresses vested rights in property and what happens when the city or a local jurisdiction takes away that investment-backed expectation. So there's a process to address that, if someone believes that we have done that. And that is a statutory process that tells us how to address that objection to our restriction. But it does not necessarily apply to current restrictions. It applies to changes that we make currently. So if we were to downzone a property, that would be a concern. So it has to do with reduction of development.
And we'd have to pay for it? We'd have to pay a balance or something?
Well, possibly. That is one of the possibilities. The other possibility would be to deal with those restrictions and stop and not enforce that restriction. But paying for it is not a casual thing. We're not talking, typically, you're not talking a small amount of money. This is significant.
Or probably an easily agreed upon amount of money, probably.
Easily agreed
Yeah,
upon?
probably not.
No.
Yeah.
It's going to be appraisal-based.
Mark?
Explain to me how a building can be up to code, but it's not inhabitable. You can't put anything in it. Like if we wanted to put a pop-up store in one of the empty buildings downtown, well, no, you can't do that. Or I've mentioned, letting an artist turn it into a studio. Well, it's not able to do that because it's not safe to enter.
I don't know what you mean by that.
Okay, I'm sure we.
However, in addition to the building being physically safe, you have to meet the zoning code for the use that's being proposed. So you can have a building that is physically safe, but not usable for a specific purpose. Also, when you are changing uses, certain things get triggered. So you would perhaps have to comply with certain parking requirements that may not have applied to the previous use. ADA requirements and other things. So simply having a building that's not hazardous doesn't mean it can be used for anything.
Okay.
You still have to comply with the zoning code as to the use.
Right. Well, what I was referring to is past meetings where I've said, instead of just putting art in an empty storefront, why can't we let an artist move in there and use it? And I was told, no, you can't do that.
Well, I wouldn't say you can't do that. We have done that under certain circumstances, but we can't allow them to move in. The landlord would have to allow that. And it does have to comply with the building code for the use proposed and with the zoning code. So an artist studio may be fine. It really depends on what you're talking about and where. So, yeah, I mean, there are things that are permittable, but you do have to meet code requirements to get there.
Does that answer your question?
Sure. We have code requirements, but if you want to do something, you need, a higher code requirement.
Well, there are certain things that aren't allowable in certain zones, even if they're commercial. Like,
Yeah,
we didn't allow gentlemen's clubs, I believe,
Correct.
near churches. Within how many feet? 500, 1,000?
I think it's
Gina?
500.
Fortunately, almost all of them are gone, except one in the county. I think we only have one left in the city. Is that right, Chief? That's an example.
It's on US 19.
Well, I sure don't know, Chief. I'm just talking,
I think it's on US 19, or was, let's put it that way.
Well, no, the one up by the fort is out in the county, I believe. and the one at the corner of 19 and Golf to Bay is the only one, or almost. But we used to have them all over the place. We used to have them downtown at the Ritz Theater, right?
Yeah.
Well, that was a triple X theater. Anyway,
Somebody emailed me about one being near Celebration Station. I don't know if that's true.
there
or
is,
not.
right
There
next to
is.
it. Mm-hmm.
I know the folks who contacted me were kind of leery about that.
It's in the county, though.
Okay.
It's in the city confines, but it's a county
It's
property.
a county property.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I'm,
Councilmember
just
Hamilton.
to weigh in on it, I've always been a very, very staunch supporter of private property rights. If you own the property, you have certain rights that come with that. You also have responsibilities, and I made that comment earlier. But, you know, normally when you buy a piece of property, especially when it's in a commercial, you know, other than residential, if it's other than residential, you know, the city has certain zoning and whatnot that, you know, puts certain restrictions on that property. And those, you know, if you don't know what those restrictions are when you buy it, shame on you. And if you want to do something that's not within that allowance, you have the opportunity to come to the city to ask to have it changed. And, you know, if you can make your case, we can talk about it. But I think, to me, as long as it's within what the code allows, and the zoning is appropriate, and you're not doing something that the zoning doesn't allow, you've got the right to do that. And, you know, just because you might not like it, someone who doesn't like it wants to complain. I don't put a lot of things. It goes back to you and I were on the council when the Bell Harbor condominiums were being built on Clearwater Beach. And we had people from Island Estates coming to complain in front of us saying, if you let them build this, it's going to block my view of the sunset. And it's like, where in the world do you think you're entitled to see unobstructed across somebody else's property? It just nowhere in this country do you have that ability. And but there are some people who just. But I will always support property owners' rights to do what is allowable with their property. If they want to do something that's not necessarily allowable, they've got a case to make, and I'll listen to it, but I won't guarantee you I'll agree to it, that's for sure.
Councilmember Beckman.
Yeah, I would just say one thing about that. I certainly, you know, support private property owners' rights. I think I looked at this a little different angle, but I think from what you're discussing, you know, we do have zoning and restrictions, but from my understanding of the Community Development Board, there is some nuance in the language, as in must conform to the aesthetics of the surrounding area for some of those developments, Edgewater and perhaps the one at Clearwater Point. And so that's up for interpretation about what does that really mean to conform to the aesthetics of the surrounding, you know, architecture or whatever. And so that's where it's not always black and white, that I think sometimes, you know, residents don't feel like this big, you know, gaudy monstrosity from Ocean's 11 is going to be built. But anyway, the way I kind of looked at this was I wanted development on the private property that we have here. So where people have vacant storefronts or some of these industrial looking sites that I see around Missouri or Cleveland or Hercules or Keene or whatever, is that I see these, I call them like underutilized. To me, it looks like nobody's there in some of these paved over places. What can we do to get people to get entrepreneurs in those buildings, get businesses in those buildings? And I know it's a patchwork. And I think with the landings referendum, I think we've heard from a lot of people that why do I drive by X, Y, or Z all the time and there's nothing there first? And so when we talk about our hierarchy of needs and where to put our resources, perhaps we need to have more people in we need to give more money to the Economic Development Department or planning so that we can work to incentivize people to come to our city and open up a business there. Maybe it's mentoring, maybe it's, reducing fees to first-time entrepreneurs that come into a storefront or something. But if that's what residents are telling us, that that's important, and Mr. Horn said, some of those priorities shift based on citizen demand or engagement for those things, maybe that's what we're hearing from residents. We say time and time again, and, we're completely built out. Documents, official documents say the city of Clearwater is completely built out, there's no more room. Then we've got to put our money and energy into how to develop the vacant patchwork of land that we have. Not vacant, I don't want to take any vacant land, but, things that have blacktop and concrete and empty buildings, and let's get life and energy in there, I'm okay with private property rights, but man, when you buy a building and you just sit on it and it's empty, that's awful. It's just awful for all of us.
But people do have the right to do that. If they want to pay the taxes and keep the building up to code, it doesn't make economic sense.
It
So-
must to them. I mean, I would like to have it in black and white so some person can show me how it makes sense for them to pay taxes and insurance and upkeep, on an empty building for years and years and years.
It doesn't. We saw it out on the beach in the early 2000s where we had very weak property owners that were offered prices that were well beyond what the properties were worth. And until we moved properties from weak hands to strong hands, nothing changed. And I see that in other segments of the city where we have very weak owners that either don't have the business acumen or don't have the capital to make improvements on their properties. And I have no earthly idea how they do it, because I sit there and look at their ROI, which in some cases is non-existent, and it's irrational. For a business person to look at, it's completely irrational. So I can't explain the behavior. They must have a lot of, extra money laying around that they want to get rid of. But as Warren Buffett used to say, if you want to build a small fortune, invest a large fortune in airlines. It seems like these people have fortunes that they just want to throw away. But I don't understand it, but I don't know. Ms. Aiken's going to bring us some ideas for downtown. The other thing I'd say just about, redevelopment in the city, we do have limited tools in our tool chest, and one of the things we've done in certain times is giving additional development rights. That has been a way to move properties from weak hands to strong hands. Denise or Gina, I don't know if either one of you want to take a bite of that, and then we need to take a break and hopefully finish off.
Gina Clayton, Planning and Development. Sorry, I'm tangled up here. Yeah, we have been really focused on creating redevelopment areas where we can build transit-supported, pedestrian-supported areas, and also that enables us to preserve our residential, more suburban areas. So downtown, Clearwater Beach, US 19, these are designated areas where our goal is to have higher density to support those goals, because when we build these kind of communities that are walkable and transit supportive, they're also sustainable from an environmental standpoint by reducing carbon emissions, commuting, that sort of thing. We have some other areas that are designated for redevelopment in our comp plan, so we will probably at some point bring more forward to you for consideration of intensifying certain areas while protecting others, and we'll probably clearly define that as we move through the comp plan update. I think we've been very successful on Clearwater Beach. That's our most successful redevelopment area. Downtown, as you all know, is still not attracting the development, even though we have the higher development potential in place and have had it for years and years. US 19 has a lot of development potential, but the market is just not there. We are seeing a lot of new residential development, but it's at low density, maybe 15 units per acre. We have higher density on Clearwater Beach being built. So there's a little lag. Denise can probably talk about that part of the redevelopment equation, but from a planning standpoint, that's what we've been focused on, creating areas where investment can occur and should occur so that we can maintain other parts of the community as the status quo.
Do you have anything you want to add at this time, Denise? Or? Okay. Anything else on this topic? Let's take a 7-minute recess. Can we do that?
Blood in my legs.
All right.
They do have this online.
Well,
This is not us, this is the county. So this is accessible?
Mayor, you know Zachary.
So this is, we have this in a format that looks like this. That's
Yeah.
not what's on the internet.
He's a good guy.
So she was asking
great
why
addition.
not.
I was with him this morning.
But this is ADA accessible?
Very impressive. And then Laurie Owens, she's a career outreach specialist.
they have it both. I mean, so there's the county's got it.
She was
listed.
never in
they
our
did
board
both
meetings.
She's the real deal.
Yeah. Yeah.
She's the real deal.
I didn't realize.
Yeah. Anyway, so
That's
that's,
why, yeah.
Ken?
I actually printed 2 of those out, so.
She checks all the boxes. We should get all the special interest.
At the Heartland Institute.
All right. Go on. We will reconvene the work session. We are on item 13. What are your feelings about supporting Major League Baseball, history of relationship, economic impact of baseball? If we don't support, what will cost beef of dismantling Spectrum or operating without a team? Who wants to, we don't have one here specifically for history. Do you want to talk a little bit about it? I know Hoyt could talk about it, or myself, but
Well, I think we are in what, year 75, 74, 75?
75 coming up.
Of our relationship, and we have, it is I think it's the second longest.
By 1 year.
By 1 year in baseball. And we have enjoyed a great relationship with the Philadelphia Phillies organization. And it's my opinion that that relationship is really responsible for their tenure here, and how our community has enjoyed, I think, quite a bit of relationship with the Philadelphia, Delaware Valley, people who have come here. Tourism has clearly been enhanced as a result of that long-term relationship. And we've invested, the Clearwater elected officials over my tenure has invested in that relationship and nurtured that relationship. The same thing with the Philadelphia Phillies, their leadership has invested in that relationship. And I think that's kind of where we are, how we have evolved. And I'll be candid and say I think that there is a desire that we reach that 100-year mark with this next agreement that has to be negotiated. And I'm optimistic that we'll get there. I can't give the specifics right now, but that relationship has been very beneficial. The Florida Operations Organization has invested in our community and in areas other than baseball. And we're not going to have it this year, but Boo Bash, which has turned out to be one of the most popular Halloween celebrations we have in the community, is done at the ballpark. We're not going to have it this year because of COVID. And just the history of baseball players that live here and have come to be a vibrant part of our community. I'll just leave it there unless you have something else to say.
Why are you looking at me? I mean, I'll go first. There's no doubt about it. Obviously, other than, Lakeland has had the Tigers 1 year longer than we've had the Phillies. And other than that, I think third is way down the list. It's nowhere near where we are. But I think this is the perfect example of you've got to spend money to make money. And, we have a whole lot of people that have bought homes and condos here from the Delaware Valley because they came down here with their family as children or brought their children down here during spring training And, as they've retired and stuff, they've bought property down here. It's great exposure. The byline, the press byline, when the Phillies are here for spring training, and it says Clearwater on that byline in every newspaper in the country and everything, that's advertising and marketing that you can't buy. That just, you really can't. And it's just, using, I'm not going to go into the full thing, but I mean, using the county's numbers. The county says the economic impact of the Phillies on Clearwater is $60 million a year. We believe it's higher than that because we use the multiplier effect. The Philly fan that's in town, spending money in the hotels, everything else, goes out, has dinner in a restaurant, leaves a tip for the server. The server then takes that money and goes out and spends it somewhere else. So it has a multiplying effect. Without that money, without the money from them, it wouldn't happen. And we've got, not only do we have the Phillies, we are the home of the Phillies. But Clearwater is a great parking spot for Blue Jay fans and Yankee fans. Because do you want to stay over here on the beach and go to a Tampa Yankee game, or do you want to stay in downtown Tampa and go to a Yankee game? Major League Baseball and is huge for our whole area, and we're so fortunate to have the Phillies here. So, we're trying to come up with, the funding mechanism to maintain and upgrade. We call it Spectrum, but as of 11 days, it won't be Spectrum anymore because I think that contract with Spectrum on the naming rights of the stadium expires at the end of October. But as with any other, you were talking earlier of any structure, maintenance and upgrades and whatnot have to be done. And yes, I'm not going to get into the economics of baseball. Yes, you have billionaire owners and millionaire players. Cut through all that. If they're not here, we don't have the family from Delaware Valley coming down here at springtime. We don't have the Phillies organization here. Their Florida operations. They're a full-time, year-round operation, and a great community partner for us. A lot of the hotels that we've built recently stay full during the springtime because of baseball. Would they be full without baseball because other people would come? Maybe. But the question is, are you willing to take that chance? Are you going to go with a guaranteed system and a guaranteed program that has worked for decades? Or are you willing to lose that on the chance that maybe we can take it in another direction? To me, it's a no-brainer. It is an absolute no-brainer. Our relationship with the Phillies is something you cannot put a dollar figure on because it's too big. And the loss of the Phillies would be enormous for our area. So,
Vice Mayor.
Without being real long-winded here, I agree everything that Councilmember Hamilton said. We've got a great relationship with the Phillies. I can tell you from my experience, when spring rolls around, my rentals on the beach are full. And they're not full of spring breakers like college kids. They're full of families that are down here to go see baseball. And, they leave for the day. They come back. Maybe at night they might walk down to the beach. I know they go down and they spend their money in restaurants. They don't cook there. They go out to dinner and spend their money. But that's exactly what kind of people we're looking for, because Clearwater is a family beach. And I can tell you, just like Hoyt said, that a lot of these people that come down over the years, they come back. I mean, the kids grow up and they come back and they buy something here because they've seen how beautiful Clearwater is. So that's something you really can't put, it's hard to put a number on that. But when the void is there, and if we decide that Phillies aren't going to be here anymore, there's going to be a big void there where, you know, we've enjoyed them being here for all the years.
Councilmember Bunker.
Well, how long is this new deal supposed to last that we're working out right now?
20 years.
Okay, so going to get us up to that
Well, that's the
100-year
plan.
mark?
They want a 20-year agreement, and we do too.
Okay. I hope we can strike a good deal, because so often teams get the better of cities. And it is a little tough to consider giving a multi-billion-dollar company a huge sum. I know how important it is to the city. I don't want to stand in the way necessarily, but I hope we can strike a good bargain. I know when I was looking through some of the facts and figures about what they'll pay for and what the city will pay for. This is extreme, I know, but I noticed that the Phillies are willing to pay to change the light bulbs. I thought, well, God bless them. But there's you know, and I was in San Diego when the Chargers, you know, we're talking about moving, and I saw the years that San Diego was losing money there. Now that the Chargers have moved on, I believe San Diego is still a wonderful place to live. I haven't heard any complaints.
Councilmember Beckman.
I just, I don't have as an emotional connection to the Phillies as some people who grew up here. I think it needs to make financial sense. I think we need to be fully transparent. I feel confident that our city manager has hired, you know, a consulting firm to do the negotiation with the Phillies and then come back to us with recommendation. But if we're, you know, there are a few things. Number one, I would hope the Phillies put a significant chunk of skin in the game and some money in as well, so they feel invested. But I think, you know, if we're asked to pitch in 14 to 16 million or whatever it was, you know, during the camp, you know, months ago, residents, you know, that's money that could go somewhere else. And so we just have to be clear that this is what the city, it's the tax, it's our coffers, it's our money that we tax, and residents, that's residents' money. And if we feel we want to give it to the Phillies and that field upkeep and maintenance, that's fine. But let's have a list, you know, again, let's have a list of all the value we get from that. And if they, you know, they do a lot of giving back in our community, and they sponsor Boo Night or whatever it is, Boo Bash and all that, is there a value in the past that's associated with that? Put that number down on a piece of paper. But I would say when people, I feel that, you know, and again, this is just a feeling, just like some of the statements that have been made up here are feelings. I have a feeling many of our hotels would be filled during that, you know, 6 to 7 week spring training period, whether the Phillies were really here or not. I mean, we have the water, we have, you know, boating and fishing and all the things that go along. We have the temperature coming from northern Illinois. People come down here. And so I think that those hotels would be filled. I think residents around here would be using restaurants and spending in our community as well. Is there value with a tradition? Absolutely. Would I want them to be here? Absolutely. But again, with transparency, what are they asking for? What is the cost to our coffers? What is the value they bring? Because the research that I've done, many economists say that a major league franchise in a city does not bring in as much as what that city is offering in subsidies. So I just want to be real transparent about it.
Well, I want to keep the relationship with the Phillies, but not at any cost. So there's a deal. There's a deal structure that can be made. We haven't gotten there yet. I think the consultant is a good idea. If you go back to when Bright House, I still call it Bright House, was built, it was $6.5 million from the city. It was $7.5 million from the county, $7.5 million from the state. And then the Phillies picked up everything above that, I believe, was the numbers.
Which came into
About 12 million more.
It was 13, yeah.
It's about 33.5 million for the entire facility back in the day. And, you know, the 7.5 from the county and the state were paid over years. We use penny for Pinellas, which I would point out is not necessarily just Clearwater taxpayers. A lot of that comes from our tourists. An awful lot of penny for Pinellas does, because they come in and spend it. And then money also came from the bed tax. That's how the county participated. You know, right now we also have the threshers. You know, about 165, I think, full-time employees year-round out at Spectrum. And then what they've also done is they've started to bring a lot of their South American players up, because they don't feel comfortable having training facilities down in Venezuela and some of the South American countries that are not very stable. Plus, they like to acclimate those players to the United States. And then we also bring in tournaments. We've had the Big East tournament many times. We brought in ACC teams for tournaments and the SEC. And with that facility, I think one of the other things that we need to kind of get at is, what would that property be used for? Would we be looking for another team, which I think is either we work to keep the Phillies or we're getting out of the business of baseball? Because I think trying to get another team, we're not going to have the following that has been built over a 75-year tradition. I think, you know, if there's a delta on that of some number, we have to analyze and see whether that's worth it. My argument would be it's probably not. Because first of all, I don't think the dollars are going to be that much less, but you will have flushed basically down the toilet 75 years of relationships. But we would have to figure out, what would that property be purposed as? You know, what would be the next economic driver for that? So, you know, that's something we're going to go through the process. The process will be transparent. It always has been. All the numbers are laid out for everybody to see, God and country, because we do everything in the sunshine. So,
But I mean, the value added, right? So all that
that's
goodwill.
always going to be, there's going to be numbers that different professionals will give you, but there is some subjectivity. And I don't care what anybody says. Whether you start talking about the landings or ecotourism or, you know, the Capitol Theater, Ruth Eckerd Hall, the aquarium, you know, whatever you want to look at, you're not going, there is no way to get a number that is absolutely 100% precise that everybody will agree upon. You use a standard methodology for valuing a team, and you look at that methodology and you follow it, and then you have to look at the numbers and decide whether it's worth it. But there will be people that doubt those numbers regardless. So anything more on the Phillies?
No, I think the only other thing is, you know, a large portion of the money that we're trying to obtain in this, through this arrangement, is the bed tax, which is paid by the tourists. And Clearwater is the largest single contributor to the bed tax fund in this county. And we, our bed tax money that we've generated has gone to a lot of great projects that aren't here. The Dali Museum in St. Pete, Tropicana Field, the new pier in St. Pete.
BMX up in Oldsmar.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of them, and I have no problem saying, we're great community partners, we're great helping the entire community, but you know what? It's our turn. This is our turn asking for the money that we've generated. I don't have any problem looking at the Development Council, Tourist Development Council, or the County Commission and saying, when's the last time we came and say, hey, we want ours? Because we have generated this. I don't feel guilty asking for it in the least. So,
Can I ask, when do we expect the recommendations or the report from the consultant that's hired to help us negotiate?
that's a Pam and Bill question.
I can't tell you that right now.
Everything's kind of taken
Well, the Phillies understand
Yeah.
we're slowing this process down. They have to slow it down. I think our consultants are slowing it down somewhat because it's such an uncertain time. And as Councilmember Hamilton said, a large portion of what is going to fund this is going to come from the TDC. And the visibility on TDC dollars is very difficult right now as your representative, because the bed tax has just really dried up. The only thing that's really doing well right now is the vacation rentals. The vacation rentals are killing it. They're actually seeing year over year, the vacation rentals are doing better than previous years, because people want to be in a house or a condo where they're not coming in contact with restaurant personnel and cleaning people and everything else. They move in, it's, their dirt, I guess. So that's doing well, but right now the TDC, I don't think has enough clarity to make a 20-year commitment, which is what this would be. If we get 6, 12, 18 months down the road and we have a vaccine and we start to see a return to normalcy, then I think they'll be able to better make a commitment.
We're establishing relationships between our consultant, the Phillies, and the county. That's where we're at right now.
Establishing a relationship between them, yeah. So when does the current contract expire, though, with the Phillies and?
25
No, I think it's
or 23.
I think it's 23.
Okay, so there's.
Because we opened in 03.
Okay.
And
Okay,
it was a 20-year agreement.
okay. Thank you.
Okay, number 14, once we get back to normal, how do we want to better engage citizens? We once did monthly breakfasts. Those were successful for a while, and then they tailed off pretty significantly. I know we could do rotating meetings with council members at libraries or multiple council members, but then we've got to notice that. Ms. Call might want to talk a little bit about that process, or Ms. Aiken.
you want to explain about the breakfast? I'm not sure everybody understands what the breakfasts were.
So one of my goals when I ran for mayor in 2005 was more public engagement. So we started doing breakfasts. You want to come up, Joel? You remember those days.
Joel got free breakfast stuff from
We
our
were
office
sending
all
out
the time.
letters to citizens randomly and inviting them to a restaurant with a city council member. And we would have, unfortunately, in the beginning, we had pretty full meetings. We kept it to about 12 to 14 people. Toward the end, we weren't getting anybody to come out. But we would have an hour and a half breakfast we'd buy, and
They wouldn't come out for a free breakfast towards the end? Really?
500 invitations, and we couldn't fill 12 to 14 spots. Is that right?
Wow.
Correct.
So a weekday morning though, like at 9, 10, whatever it is?
No,
8,
it was
9?
normally 7
Oh, 7?
because we wanted to get people there before they had to go to
Yeah.
work.
Yeah, okay.
And we rotated it around to the different restaurants that whatever council member was hosting liked. And also geographically, we moved it around. I
How
know
long-
we've had council members do meetings at libraries individually, where they kind of posted that they were going to meet. If we have more than one council member, you all know that then it's gotta be a noticed meeting, and if more than one's gonna talk, we have to have somebody there taking minutes and notice it and everything else. So
How long
the
did your
qu-
breakfast go on? How long did that last? Like a year?
Probably 2 years.
Oh, really?
Frank got better attendance than any of the council members. Kind of gave some of us a complex.
Oh. I also always had it at Lenny's, which I think
That
was
didn't hurt either.
a good draw too. It was probably Lenny's and not me. But we have had them at other, libraries and rec centers. And then the only other question I had, this is my frequent flyer question. See? I really want to ask this question. At what point, first of all, I answer emails pretty quickly and try to be complete. I don't always have the answers, so I do have to go to staff on some of them. But then there are some people that we get literally 5 and 6 emails a day. Not only for us, but for our staff. And I've told some of them, at some point, we have to ask the question, is it reasonable? And that's what I'd ask some of the people that do that. All of these folks have tasks that they have the responsibility to complete. And, I think at some point we do have to ask somebody we can't officially ask for a limit. Pam's cringing probably.
No, I'm fine.
But, at some point enough is enough, or let's ask bigger sets of questions, but once a week. So those are the different topics on this that I just like feedback on. Because we go in cycles of when we've really tried to reach out to citizens, get them more engaged, but if they aren't availing themselves of it, are we doing it wrong? Or do they really only care when something is in their backyard and going to negatively impact, the way they live? Either a development, or the hours of the rec center or their library have been cut, or their park doesn't have new playground equipment, or, those are kind of some of the things that you see people come out of the woodwork, and then once they get resolved, then they kind of fade back into, I've got my life to live. I've got to go to work. I've got to feed my kids. I've got to take them to games, and so run the city. I'll get back to you when I need something, which is fine. I don't blame people for that.
Well, I think as you spoke in your actually closing comments in our last meeting, times have changed. Social media, everything has just made, emails. When I first got elected in 2001, if somebody, emailed us at the city for a question, normally that email then got pushed off to a staff member to give us the information we needed to respond. And that process sometimes took 3-4 days. Now, it's almost like somebody sends in a question and they expect an answer immediately. Like, no matter what else we're working on or need to be doing, we got to drop it to answer that question for them. And it's, I don't want to say it's a sense of entitlement, but, social media and today's technology has created this level of expectation that I'm not sure is reasonable in all situations. And your question is very timely to say, how much is, when is enough enough? And I don't know that I have the answer to it, but it's difficult. And I can tell you the language and the tone of emails today are infinitely different than the tone of emails that we got back in the early 2000s. I mean, it's just totally different. Apparently people get really brave on a keyboard. And that just, it's a sad state of our society is what it is.
Well, civility is gone,
Yeah,
unfortunately, in many
absolutely. We've
respects.
lost civility. So, yeah, well, that starts at, it's kind of started in Washington, D.C., and it's funneled its way all the way down. It's, there used to be, they still talk about reaching across the aisle in Washington, but I think there's an electrified fence in the middle of the aisle, and they're not allowed to reach across it anymore. I mean, heck, last week during the Supreme Court hearings, at the end of it, Dianne Feinstein, reached out and hugged Lindsey Graham, and you had Democrats saying, you need to resign for that action. It's like, give me a break. We were built on, this country was built for the first 200 plus years on compromise. The political parties being able to work together, they had different approaches, and sometimes the goals didn't match, but they found a way to find a middle road, a compromise, and that's how you move forward. Now there is no compromise. It's either our way or no way, and that's on both sides of the aisle, so to speak, and that's not a good thing. So, and because of that and the vitriol that flies back and forth at that level, people think it's okay to do it all the way down to our level. And I'm sorry, we're all neighbors here. We're where the rubber meets the road at this level. And it's sad. Like I've said before, I've done this for 12 years. I got 2 more to go. The first 11 years were a lot of fun. The last 3, I'm not really looking forward to. I mean, it's just a different atmosphere. And
So
that's a sad state of...
any ideas on engaging?
Well,
Not to just gonna kick the puck back into
yeah,
play.
go ahead.
Councilmember Bug.
I do feel we do need to answer people's questions. What I see on a lot of these chains, though, is we'll give an answer, and then there'll continue to be an argument over it. No, that answer's not right. Well, that's the answer we're providing due to input from other people here in the city, like the attorney, and this is what we consider the answer. And it can be infuriating when those cycles keep going on and on and on.
Well, there's some citizens that are actually asking more questions than the council. And at some point, it's almost as though certain citizens are trying to guide city policy via the email. So really there's 2 parts though. I really would like to talk first about, is there something you would like to do either before we get back to normal or now to better engage citizens and give them an outlet so that they know that they have an opportunity to be heard in a different way. In a different way than just coming, for citizens to be heard at a council meeting and getting their 3 minutes, having more of an open forum. I mean, I'm happy to go to a library and sit with citizens and talk for 90 minutes about anything that's on their mind. The question is, that's something you all would like to participate in? It is going to cause, you would have to have at least 1 staff member there probably to help take some notes and, because you want to be able to engage and not just sit there and take notes. It's a lot more helpful.
I'm trying to think of ways that I can engage the public too in these changing times. And, I've talked to people on Island Estates, because they have a website, and I thought maybe I could just post some things where we're at with the city for people who don't want to take the time to look at a council meeting, you know, but just say, hey, this is what we're talking about now, and if there's any input, you can, you know, email me, and I'll try to get an answer for you on it, one way or another. If there are any concerns, if there's anything, but I think that most people out in the community, most people don't really think, I think you nailed it, they don't really think about changes in the government unless it's something that affects them directly. And then they want to have an answer to it. And they could always come to council during a meeting and ask us why, you know, but I think there are a certain level of people that feel that are activists in the community that represent, they feel they represent the community and have to come to us because, you know, and give us what they think that the community is talking about. Even though the whole community is not really talking about it, there's a small group of people talking about it, and those are the ones that we get the 5 and the 10 emails a day on that, you know, they go on and on about it. And I don't know. I don't really have an answer. I would love to be available to do something if it was in a library, or I even talked to Bill one time about maybe going out to the rec centers, you know, on an evening and having an hour out where if anybody in the neighborhood wanted to come out and talk to me or any of that part of the city, and maybe we could have points within the city, maybe our rec centers and our libraries that we could go to. But I think one council member could take one council member could take another, so we don't have to have a, you know, advertised meeting. And we do the best we can with, if we can't answer it, we could take their information and get back to them. But I would be fine with meeting with people to see what their concerns are, and if there's any way we, you know, can help. I think it would be a good thing. I don't necessarily have to have a dinner or a breakfast, but I think just going out and just limiting for an hour maybe and saying, hey, we got an hour. I think what you're going to see is you're going to see the same people we see at the council meetings that come here. But I want to make an opportunity at least for anybody else that wants to come in. And I would be willing to do that after hours where, you know, it would be easier for people that are working during the day to come out. It might give us a little bit of, in the long run, it might be good for us because it would feel like we're going out to people and saying, hey, how can we help? What are the things that, you know, really are concerning? And just showing up and having people, you know, well, you can't do it anymore, shaking hands with people, but, you know, giving them a fist bump saying, hey, we're here and we're listening.
Councilmember Beckman.
I don't know what kind of turnout we get if we were one at a rec center or library. I know that Dr. Condiff did that occasionally, and I had, you know, a few people say that the turnout wasn't all that great. We could reach out to him and find out what his turnout really was. I have no idea how he promoted it. Pardon?
Not so great.
Not so great?
Yeah.
You know, in my experience in reaching out to people, to solicit information, you know, offering food is a good incentive. If you have pizza with a council member or whatever, I don't, you know, it's not my kind of thing, but it can work, it helps. You mentioned the Island Estates and their website and having some kind of link to communicate with you. I have a web page that I developed once I was elected, and, you know, it asks for citizen engagement. And I spent a bit of time on it initially when I was elected and COVID was new, and then I've just, you know, I've been swamped, so I've been remiss in keeping it up. But I'm going to tell you, as a teacher, I kept my website up every single day, and after November, I will keep my website up. But I don't think there's been a lot of visits, you know, and I have all sorts of documents linked and resources and all that stuff. So, you know, I need to do a better job with that. Along those lines, perhaps we could have the CNC link to our emails or something, that if they want to communicate with us as a batch, you know, it could be linked on the CNC page, maybe. I am a huge proponent of allowing people to call into our meetings, and I would push for this even after COVID, whenever that's going to be. And to me, I think it's like way at the end of next year. Because if we're going to be honest, if we really listen to the news and the idea seems to be that it's a vaccine that may be administered in 2 different doses, and we have people that are not going to, you know, are going to question the vaccine, and all that stuff is I don't think we're going to be back to normal with real safety for a year. But anyway, allowing call-ins regardless of COVID. We could consider setting a later meeting date or time rather than 6 p.m. And I know, and I feel for the staff who works a full day, and we had that 1 a.m. meeting almost, or whatever it was, 12:30. But if we have a meeting that maybe starts at 7, perhaps we get more people to attend. If we offer childcare, again, after COVID, perhaps we get people to attend. Perhaps we can invite neighborhood representatives to come to the meeting and describe their community. So maybe we have a Skycrest, somebody who lives in Skycrest, and says, we give them 10 minutes on a work session, or probably a council meeting, because a work session is when people work. But it's like, come just, you know, describe your community for us. What are your big concerns there in Skycrest, or Lake Bellevue, or Countryside, you know, or North Beach, and do that. The other thing that I thought would be interesting is if we, you know, go on a tour of that neighborhood. The 5 of us, we could go and meet them on a Wednesday night or something. They could walk us around some different areas. You know, this is what I like, this is a problem area, whatever. I think we need to go to people and communities. So kind of like a walk the talk. Before each meeting, we allow an hour to walk around the community, take a brief walk talk with residents, learn what they care about. We can welcome more creative citizen engagement. Again, when I knocked on doors, every once in a while I'd come upon a house that had a cool little brass or bronze plaque that said, you know, House of the Quarter. And it's like, wow, you know, what's this all about? And, you know, you talk to the resident, and, you know, maybe we could bring back something like that. Maybe we could have a nonprofit of the quarter. So these are people that live in our community and do a lot of important work, and maybe we could recognize them once a quarter at our meetings. Clearwater's Finest, we can honor a city worker that we celebrate. I think it'd be great to start a nonprofit coalition and have a small group that interacts with our city council. So again, this is a different type of resident engagement. I'm thinking that these are the people that live here, work here, do important work that the city can partner with or celebrate or help or whatever. So I think it would enrich their lives, and it would improve our reputation. You know, we care, we work collaboratively. And then as far as your comments about citizen engagement and people emailing us again and again, I'm right there with you. You know, it's unbelievable, but, you know, as a parent or a teacher, I don't like to punish the whole class for the bad behavior of a couple. And so I think we're really talking about probably 5 or fewer chronic emailers, right?
No, I'm not talking about punishing anybody.
Yeah,
I'm talking about the council at some point having a policy that, first of all, we can tell staff they can slow down.
Yeah.
Because they feel obligated, because then we get the complaints. I mean, you know, you all see all of the emails that I get and respond to, and some of the people you go round and around and around and around and around and around. And I'm not exaggerating for anybody who might be watching this boring meeting, but I mean, literally it can go, it can be 20, 30 emails in a week.
Yeah.
And to me, that gets excessive. And I think Mr. Bunker's point of somebody not liking the answer, and you know how your kids used to be, they'd ask the question in a different manner. hoping to get a different answer, or go ask a different parent, hoping to get a different answer. And, you know, at some point, I think we have to say, and a couple of the people I have said, you know, I understand we're going to have to agree to disagree. But as far as this topic goes, I'm done. And I just want to collectively hear that everybody's okay with that.
Yeah.
But I think we go the extra mile for people. That's not something we're going to pull the trigger on easily. But I want staff to know at some point they have the freedom, you know, to be able to do that. And I think the council as well. So any other ideas, Councilmember Bunker?
Yes, is it too late to get Lenny's? I've been craving
It is, they
Lenny's since
close
you
at
brought
3.
it up. Yeah, that's what I thought. And I'm happy to meet anyone, anytime, anywhere. At one of the meetings, I said, hey, if you want to come down, we can have a meal downtown at one of the restaurants and talk about what you ever want to talk about. I've got a couple people who have taken me up on that. One needs a little more time to prepare. And I'm looking at you, Sandra. But we can also hop on to neighborhood, the neighborhood app, and say, hi, do you have any questions? Do you have anything you want to talk about? Or respond to a thread that's already up there?
Well, I'm happy to do, you know, I'm happy to go out. Once things do get back to normal, there is going to always be, you can always go to all the neighborhood association meetings that meet regularly. I mean, I would recommend that. It's the best way to get to know the neighborhood and the neighbors within the neighborhood. And oftentimes they will ask for somebody to come out. There are also times when we've had council members that showed up to every meeting, and I had some of the presidents of those associations saying, you know, we'd like to have a private conversation every once in a while without a city representative there because we want to talk openly. And, you know, some of them felt like they may get punished if they started talking negatively about the city. Do you have something to add, Joelle? Any ideas? I mean, it's going to help when we have a neighborhoods coordinator back. And I would like to see the grants come back. That's something that I think is important. It was a great thing that we had with the neighborhoods. It was a way to leverage money. And my house was neighborhood of the quarter once. But,
yeah, and Gina can speak to the neighborhoods portion. I'm Joelle Castelli, Public Communications Director. We do have the neighborhoods coordinator back on staff, so that person has started. We just recently did a Facebook Live chat with the chiefs, so we have 2 of those that we've done, and those are kind of targeted in that you're only really hitting people who are on Facebook, but it is a way that we could do those chats and start those off and see if there's anybody who wants to come in and ask questions to the chat. We can moderate the chat and have some type of decorum to them. So we can send you those links and you can see that. I personally think at the very beginning of when we did the breakfast, they were very successful. And we had a lot of people who were different than the normal people who would come out. We sent out invitations to registered voters. So we did not just say, who wants to ask questions, come to a breakfast. So we personally invited registered voters and then took the people who called from that. And at the beginning, we were having to make people go to a wait list because we were over the limit for that month's breakfast. So that's just what I wanted to add. But the chiefs can also tell you about how their experience with the live chats went.
Either of you want to talk about that? Or?
I'll really briefly, I suppose. I felt it was a really good, innovative idea that Joelle's team came up with. I know that when I did the community groups, I felt that there's a segment that we just aren't reaching through the traditional means. It does have the advantage of being moderated and not and giving you time to basically speak. I think, connected with a group of residents that weren't the ones that traditionally would reach out through some of the other methods that you talked about. The downfall, of course, is that you're on Facebook, so it could be somebody in Illinois, you know, or no offense, Illinois, I'm sorry, I'm sure it's a different state. Nebraska. Nebraska, but another state, so it doesn't have the ability to stay concise to your constituent group, but it seems like in today's day and age, a given that you need to probably utilize some of those tools.
Does that mean I'd have to get back on Facebook?
No, I think use Joel's account.
Good, perfect.
Scott Elders, Fire Chief, Clearwater Fire Rescue. Same thing as Chief Slaughter. I think it was a great idea. It was very fun to do. I will tell you that be ready for the tough questions. And if you watch it, my daughter actually sent the question in to find out who was the best kid that I liked out of all of them. So it's on the spot. But it is. I think it was really well. I think it really did. I think from a learning aspect from me, because we have an image to portray, I think, and same with, if it's more relaxed, we had talked with Allie and a couple others, I think if it's a more relaxed setting, it provides a little bit more interaction for the public as opposed to a rigid look. And I know that's what I need to work on next time, but very good thing I think it was. So I think it would be great to do something like that. So thank you.
Great. All right, anything else on 14?
I do. I just want to mention that, I know we started off, because I jot down some phrases or whatever, but that civility is gone. It's not gone. I mean, we have so many people that engage with us in very rational, civil, respectful ways. They want to collaborate. They are working hard. And so it's some are bad, but not all. And I think not most. And I just want to make that point. And I think in our country too, it's a tough time, but there are more good people who are operating with civility and with good in their hearts. So it's not gone.
Well, I don't think it's gone. It is different though. And I want to say, for those of us who've been up here for almost 20 years, it is different.
Yeah.
I'm telling you, it's different. It's way different. You didn't see the emails that you see today. It just never even occurred. I don't think people even thought to respond or to interact in the ways that you see today. It just didn't happen. If it did, Carolyn Brink would take care of them. Who was our old Patty and who was the most protective mother bear that you would ever come across. All right, number 15. I don't think anyone knows how this came about. It was put under your name. Did you do that, Miss Aiken?
No, sir. It was on the list. I just moved it to the bottom. But I'm also thinking.
I put it on the list because he called me and told me to put it on the list.
There you go. Hey, I thought so.
Well, he is getting older, but
Bus that just ran you over?
do you remember
The
why
only
he put it?
the only reason I can think of why my name is associated with that was that I was eager to hear your feedback on the budget. That's all. If you had some budget feedback among you, how you approach the budget. But otherwise,
The overall budget, not the council budget.
Yeah, overall budget.
Okay.
And this year's.
Was that supposed?
Yeah, I mean, as far as your budget is pretty easy to put together unless you start adding things. All right, Pam's looking at me.
Well, the reason I'm giving you that eyeball is because I think the discussion was about council's budget.
Oh, okay.
And because in years past, we actually talked about how that would be managed, and each council member had an allocation, if you will, that they had to work within. And I don't think we're really doing that right now.
I have an allocation? I have money?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, actually,
Can we transfer, can we add it to like next year?
it included
Yeah, it was a travel budget for
travel.
Florida League of Cities.
That's what it was.
business cards,
Suncoast
all
League
that
of
kind of
Cities and
stuff.
things like that. So a lot of this isn't going on right now.
Right.
I mean, I will tell you, when the time comes, I would like to rejoin the U.S. Conference of Mayors. My replacement didn't care for it, and there's things about it I don't frankly care for. But I do think that there is enough good that came out of it that I had the ability to bring back.
No, he didn't want to.
Personally, I like stealing other people's good ideas or learning from their mistakes. And that's what I got out of the U.S. Conference of Mayors. But it is a budgetary item. Because there's travel twice a year and there is a membership fee.
Yeah. 10 or 12 grand.
Yeah. Councilmember Beck?
Yeah, one thing I thought that I could mention, it's not going to be popular, and it was sort of brought up at the charter review meetings. But, I'm a huge proponent for more diversity on the council, and throughout a whole bunch of different departments. But, we're paid, I don't know if it's like $27,000 or $28,000 a year. And if
When'd you get a raise?
is that what it is?
No, it's
I
not.
looked.
It's like 20, maybe 21.
Well, I think I get like $330 a week or whatever it is, and in order to serve, you need to have, this can't be your job, your only job. And for me, it takes a lot of hours to prepare and to engage with residents and different organizations that are within the community. And, I just thought, well, for another $30,000 per person, you could have a salary of, close to 60, and maybe somebody could afford to do that. It's just something to think about as you move, if you're talking about a budget and the city council. But this isn't a job for somebody who's, 20 to 60 years old or whatever.
I think we have that conversation every charter review committee for.
We do, I sat in on it, yeah.
And it goes back a while, because I can tell you, in my first campaign, first time I ran, and I didn't mean it as a slight to anybody, and I still don't, but we went through, in the 90s, the city of Clearwater, was a booming time for a lot of things, and Clearwater missed the boat on it in a lot of ways, because we had, at that time, the council was only getting paid, I think, 12 grand a year, not even. And as I said, I was very fortunate to be able to run. I had the family support. We had our family business, and I had the support of my family to run. But in most cases, for a long time through the 80s and 90s, the primary makeup of our council was people who had nothing but time on their hands, which was housewives and retirees. And that's what it was.
Or independently wealthy.
Or independently wealthy people. And, if you want people who can afford, to do the job, yeah, we tried. We made the comment, raise the, even back then, people at the Charter Review and the Chamber of Commerce was saying, you need to raise the salary of a city council person up to $60,000 a year. You'll get a much better, you wouldn't have got me, you'd have gotten a better candidate. And it's something that has been discussed, and people have said it for years, but we've just never gone there, and for whatever reason. So,
Well, it's a political hot potato.
yeah.
I mean, so are you going to vote yourself 100 and X percent? I don't know what the council's
Yeah.
salary is right now. I think it's 23.
I think
But I could be wrong. It's something like that.
21. 21. and
21.
You get the big bucks. Not
I
us.
do. I get the big bucks.
And well worth it.
But truly, I mean, it is hard to
Yeah.
a lot of people that don't have flexibility in their schedule. Prior to 2001, I could not have done it. But I moved into a different position where I had the ability and the flexibility. Had no idea how many hours it took, really, even talking to people who were sitting council members. But it does exclude a lot of people from being able to run. But you have to have the intestinal fortitude to either do it or do it for the next group
is
that
what you
comes
Do it on your
in,
way out, yeah.
okay? Which I would be happy to do. I'll never take the benefit of it as long as I sit up here. But I would be happy to give that to the next person. Even if you did raise the salaries, it is a rounding error in the budgetary process. I hate to say that, but it really is. It's not gonna make a huge difference in the overall budget of the city.
Oh, no.
But, you know, I would never vote it for myself. I don't know that the council's ever voted for a raise. Never in the 20
we
years.
Well,
We talked
voted
about
for
it.
cost of living, but,
Just the COLA, but that's
yeah.
attached to CPI,
the-
right?
Yes.
Have you ever had any council vote themselves an actual raise?
No, I can't recall that you actually did that. You did adopt an ordinance, and that was also relatively recently, that included CPI. And you would have to, you cannot give yourselves a raise, and I know that that has to be for the next round.
I know, I remember Charter Review brought it forward to give a raise. And 3 of the sitting council people were up for reelection, and they didn't want it to look like they were trying to give themselves a raise, so they said, no, we're not even gonna put it on the ballot.
Right, that's right.
If we wanted to engage with citizens, though, I'm sure there'll be plenty of them coming in if we say, hey, let's give ourselves a raise. There's so many people who are struggling, and I know what you're talking about, Kathleen, but it's rough. We do this because we wanted to.
I know,
serve.
but there are a lot of other people that want to as well. You know, I mean.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so you would still like some budget. What specifically would
Well,
you?
no, I just, again, this is,
Just a
because this
topic.
was your discussion, I just didn't know whether you all had some thoughts about it, but Pam, I think, more accurately explains why it's on the list. It's not so much, it was mainly your budget.
It is.
Not the city budget, so. I would like to make one comment on the conversation, though, is that I think if you do, it's hard enough to determine if this is a full-time or part-time job. You add more money to the equation, you're gonna have to sort that out. And the reason I say that is that many of the citizens aren't asking you for policy decisions. They're asking you to change what they don't like that's already established. So just imagine with me, okay? So now someone is elected and their salary can support their being full-time counsel. What happens when they discover that maybe there really isn't that much policy work to be done, but they're getting a whole lot of feedback from citizens who want to change things that they don't like. And then what you're going to end up finding is that you're going to get more involved in a lot of the administrative areas where the only way you're going to sort that out is to change your rules. If you're going to serve your citizens the way that they're asking you to serve. I mean, some of that happens. I mean, some of it happens. The rules just get out of sync, and they really aren't as applicable. And then, you know, someone approaches you and you look at it and you say, okay, well, maybe we ought to talk about it, and then you change it. But I do think that is going to be a manifestation of what happens when you now have more time to either respond or figure out, well, let's try to do this. You know, I'm just saying. Something to think about.
Oh, Pam, sorry.
The other thing I believe that happens is when you have council members that are full-time, they also need more staff. They'll need legislative, if you look at strong mayor systems, for example, a lot of the council members have full-time staff. They'll have secretarial staff, they may even have a legislative aide, sometimes in addition to that. So when if this goes from an expectation that your job is part-time, then you will likely need more support than you're getting now. And then it just kind of snowballs.
A lot of unexpected consequences.
Yes.
Okay. We're gonna do the advisory boards at a separate meeting, natural gas. The only other, thing was to talk about measurable goals and priorities for the city manager. Do you wanna do that today? Do you wanna do it in, relation to, the salary discussion that we're gonna have, or within the, vision and strategic planning?
Well, are we gonna have a discussion about, interviewing, or when we are starting a process for a new city manager? Would it be then as well?
We could do that, we can do, I mean, one of the things, we're gonna be talking about, the potential search at some point in the process. And part and parcel of that is, I think, you want, personally, I will just bury the lead. I believe you use an outside company for that. And one of the things that they will do is they have to put the job description together for whoever's going to be the new city manager. And that is something that then you could add to the job description, that there will be measurable goals for the manager that are going to change over time, because that's really how you prioritize what you want focused.
I agree with that.
So that might be a more appropriate time to put it in and have that discussion. So, are there any things that we didn't hit that you all would like to bring up? I hope this was helpful. It was helpful for me to kind of get a gauge on where everybody is on different topics. I'm sure it was helpful, if not a little boring for staff, but at least they got to hear, I think, the different philosophies that everybody has and viewpoints on what are priorities for them and where they want to spend more and less time. So, Mr. Horn, anything to add in conclusion?
No, I think it has been beneficial. Well, I would like to have kind of a separate conversation about advisory boards so we can agenda that.
Right.
And like you said, we're going to also agenda the conversation around how you want to approach replacing me as the manager. So that's another separate.
Wouldn't put it in that language,
Well,
but okay.
You're
irreplaceable.
Hiring your next city manager. And I do think, I'm not sure how to frame this, but you didn't talk about the gas system. And I do think that there is some difference of opinion about that. And I think there should be an opportunity for you all to kind of work through it. Because we ought to, in my opinion, ought to be pretty much in lockstep on our public-facing perspective on our gas system, since it's ours.
But I think we need a separate meeting on that.
Okay.
And
we'll
we
do
need
that.
to discuss some of the data that we want to hear.
Right, that's right. Yeah. Okay, I got that.
Ms. Aiken, anything?
No, sir.
Okay. Anything else from council?
The topics on the advisory board or the gas company or whatever, those would be tagged on to a work session?
Right.
Probably? Okay.
Yeah, we'll try to make sure there's sufficient time.
I think the advisory boards, we can just hash out. I think we need to have a discussion prior to the presentation on gas to actually discuss some of the things that we want to hear about.
I agree.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Okay? So if we can agenda that. All right? Hey, I thank everybody for all the work they put into this and the open discussion. I think it was very beneficial. Thank you all.
Very good.
We will adjourn the work session.